Daniel Hayes stood frozen in the parking garage at 11 p.m., staring at the woman kneeling beside her broken-down car. The same woman whose whispered confession 3 minutes ago had just shattered every wall he'd spent 5 years building. "I wish you were mine," Claire had said, her voice breaking in the darkness. And now the silence between them felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. He was a single father with a 6-year-old daughter sleeping at his sister's house, a man who'd made himself invisible to survive. And she was the new employee everyone noticed. Brilliant, engaged to someone important, completely off limits. But the way she was looking at him now, tears reflecting the fluorescent lights, made him realize that some moments don't ask for permission before they change everything. If you want to see how a confession in a parking garage unravels 2 carefully constructed lives, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now hit that like button, and let me tell you about the night Daniel Hayes discovered that being invisible doesn't protect you from being seen. Daniel Hayes had learned to be invisible. It wasn't something he'd planned, not a conscious decision made in a single moment. It had happened gradually, the way a person learns to walk quietly through a house at night, avoiding the creaking floorboards, moving through shadows. 5 years of single fatherhood had taught him that survival meant keeping his head down, doing his work, and never, ever drawing attention to himself. At 32, Daniel had the kind of face that people forgot quickly, pleasant but unremarkable, with dark hair he kept short because it was easier, and brown eyes that seemed designed to look down rather than meet anyone's gaze directly. He dressed in the same rotation of plain button-downs and dark jeans, clothes that didn't stand out in the employee break room or the school pickup line. He'd become the person others passed in hallways without seeing, the technician who fixed problems so efficiently that people barely remembered he'd been there. That invisibility had become his armor, his shield against a world that had already taken too much from him. The Network Operations Center at Meridian Technologies occupied the 3rd floor of a glass and steel building in downtown Seattle. Daniel had worked there for 7 years, the last 5 in a kind of self-imposed isolation that his coworkers had learned to accept. He arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, handled server maintenance and network issues with quiet competence, and left at 4 p.m. to pick up his daughter Emma from school. He never attended company happy hours, never joined the lunch groups that formed in the cafeteria, never stayed for the birthday celebrations that seemed to happen every other week. His workspace reflected that same careful minimalism. A single photo of Emma sat on his desk, her gap-toothed smile at age 4, pigtails slightly crooked because he'd been learning how to braid hair from YouTube videos. No other personal items, no decorative touches, nothing that invited questions or conversation. Just his monitors, his tools, and the methodical work that filled his days with predictable problems that had predictable solutions. The break room coffee machine broke on a Tuesday morning in late September. Daniel had noticed the small crowd gathered around it when he'd walked past at 7:15 a.m., but he'd kept moving, heading to his desk with the single-minded focus that had become second nature. Not his problem. The facilities team would handle it. He had a server migration scheduled for 8 a.m. that required his full attention. But at 7:45, his desk phone rang. "Daniel, it's Margaret from HR." Her voice carried that apologetic tone people used when they were about to ask him to do something outside his job description. "I know this isn't technically your department, but the coffee machine is completely dead and facilities can't get here until this afternoon. Half the sales team has a client presentation at 9, and they're borderline hostile without caffeine. Could you possibly take a look?" Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "I'm not really—" I know. But you fixed that printer on the 4th floor last month, and everyone said you're some kind of wizard with electronics. Please? I'll owe you one." That was how Daniel found himself kneeling on the break room floor 20 minutes later, the coffee machine's front panel removed, tracing wiring with hands that were steadier than his reluctant agreement to be here. A small crowd still lingered nearby, though most had given up and headed back to their desks after watching him work in silence for a few minutes. He was aware of them the way you're aware of background noise, present but not requiring attention. His focus had narrowed to the burnt-out heating element he'd identified, the quick fix he could make with components from the storage room. This was the kind of work he understood: clear problem, logical solution, no emotional complexity. "Is it fixable?" The voice was new, closer than the others had been. Daniel glanced up and found himself looking at a woman he'd never seen before. which meant she was either a client or a new hire, because he'd made it his business to know everyone at Meridian by sight so he could avoid unnecessary interactions. She was younger than him, probably mid-20s, with light brown hair pulled into a professional ponytail and eyes that held genuine curiosity rather than the impatient entitlement he'd expected. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, her employee badge still pristine and uncreased in the way that marked someone in their first week. "Probably," Daniel said, returning his attention to the machine's internal components. "Heating elements shot. I can bypass it temporarily, get you basic functionality until facilities replaces the part." "You're not from facilities." It wasn't a question. She'd clearly checked his badge, which identified him as network operations. "No. But you know how to fix coffee machines. I know how to troubleshoot electrical systems." Daniel reconnected two wires, testing the circuit with a multimeter he'd retrieved from his toolkit. "The principles are the same, whether it's a server or an appliance." She crouched down beside him, close enough that he caught the faint scent of jasmine perfume. Most people kept their distance when he worked, treating him like part of the equipment. Her proximity made him acutely aware of the cramped space, the fluorescent lights overhead, the fact that he hadn't had a real conversation with anyone outside Emma's school in months. "That's actually brilliant," she said, watching his hands work. "Most people would just shrug and say, 'Not my job.'" Well, most people would be right. Daniel finished the bypass connection and carefully began reassembling the front panel. "This isn't my job. And yet here you are." There was something in her tone, not flirtation exactly, but a warmth that felt dangerous in its sincerity. Daniel concentrated on tightening the last screw, hyper-aware of her presence beside him. "Margaret from HR asked nicely," he said finally, "and I was avoiding a conference call." She laughed, the sound unexpected and genuine. "Well, on behalf of the entire caffeine-dependent staff, thank you. I'm Claire, by the way. Claire Morgan. I started in business development last Monday." Daniel stood, gathering his tools. "Daniel Hayes, network operations." The coffee machine wizard. "That's not—" He stopped, catching the slight smile on her face. She was teasing him, gently, in a way that suggested she'd already figured out he wasn't comfortable with attention. "Just someone who understands circuits." Claire stood as well, accepting the paper cup of coffee he'd poured from the now-functioning machine as a test. She took a sip, her eyes widening slightly. "It actually works. You're like a surgeon, but for appliances." "It's a temporary fix," Daniel said, already moving toward the door. "Facilities will install the proper part this afternoon. Don't expect miracles." "Too late," Claire called after him, still smiling. "You already performed one." Daniel didn't respond, but he felt her gaze following him down the hallway. He told himself it didn't matter, that it was just a friendly interaction from someone too new to know that he didn't do friendly interactions. By tomorrow, she'd learn the unspoken rules of Meridian Technologies, would understand that Daniel Hayes was the guy who fixed things quietly and then disappeared. But for the rest of that Tuesday, he found himself distracted in a way he hadn't been in years. Every time he passed the break room, he noticed the steady flow of people getting coffee from the machine he'd repaired. Each successful cup felt like evidence of something he couldn't quite name. Not pride exactly, but a reminder that he still knew how to solve problems that mattered to people, even small ones. Emma asked him about his day that night while he made dinner, the way she always did. 6 years old with his dark hair and her mother's intense curiosity, she sat at the kitchen counter doing homework with the focused determination that made his chest ache with love and terror in equal measure. "Work was fine," he said, the same answer he gave every night. "How was school?" "Madison said her dad works with computers, too." Emma didn't look up from her math worksheet, carefully writing numbers in uneven rows. "Does he work with you?" "Probably a different department, sweetheart. It's a big company." Madison said her dad takes her to work sometimes, on special days when school is closed. Daniel paused in the middle of chopping vegetables, recognizing the careful way Emma had introduced this topic. She'd been doing this lately, testing boundaries by mentioning what other kids' fathers did, gauging his reactions. "Would you like that?" he asked quietly. "To see where I work?" Emma's head came up, eyes bright. "Really? Maybe during winter break, if you want. I want to see the computers and meet your friends." "I don't really have—" Daniel caught himself. saw the way Emma's expression had already begun to fall. I have coworkers, people I work with. You could meet them. It was a small promise, probably one he'd find a way to avoid when the time came, but Emma's smile was worth the temporary discomfort. She returned to her homework with renewed focus while Daniel finished making stir-fry, the kitchen filling with familiar smells and comfortable silence. Later, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat in the living room of their small two-bedroom apartment and did what he did most nights, tried not to think about everything that had gone wrong to bring them here. The framed photos he kept in a drawer rather than on display. The wedding ring he'd moved to a box after the first year alone. The carefully maintained facade that made people think he was just naturally quiet, rather than someone who'd learned that keeping everyone at arm's length hurt less than letting them close. Sarah had been gone for 5 years, not dead. Somehow that would have been easier to explain to Emma, but gone in the way that felt like death anyway. Postpartum depression that had never lifted, anxiety that had consumed her until she'd become someone he didn't recognize, and finally the morning he'd woken to find her note on the kitchen counter and Emma crying in her crib. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. Please don't look for me." He hadn't. By the time he'd processed what the note meant, by the time he'd gotten Emma fed and changed and called his sister in a panic, Sarah had already emptied their small savings account and disappeared so completely that the private investigator he'd briefly hired had found nothing but dead ends. So Daniel had done what he had to do. Learn to be both parents, learn to braid hair and pack school lunches, and show up to kindergarten concerts alone while other families sat in groups. Learned to make himself small and efficient and invisible so that Emma's life could be as normal as possible despite the gaping absence that defined it. He'd succeeded, mostly. Emma was thriving, happy, healthy, surrounded by friends at school. She asked about her mother sometimes, in the careful way children ask about painful things, and Daniel told her age-appropriate truths that never quite answered the real question. Where is she? Why did she leave? Was it something I did? The last question Emma had never actually asked aloud, but Daniel saw it in her eyes sometimes, the worry that she'd somehow caused the abandonment. He worked every day to prove otherwise, to be present and steady and reliable enough that she'd never doubt she was wanted. That presence required invisibility elsewhere, required that Daniel have no life, no identity, no desires beyond being Emma's father. It had worked for 5 years, this careful construction of a half-life built around her needs and nothing else, until a woman with kind eyes crouched beside him in a break room and thanked him for fixing a coffee machine as though he'd done something remarkable. Daniel shook his head, dismissing the thought. Claire Morgan was new, professionally friendly, probably engaged, or dating someone age-appropriate. The fact that she'd smiled at him meant nothing except that she didn't yet know he was the person everyone learned to overlook. He went to bed telling himself tomorrow would return to normal, that the strange awareness of being seen would fade back into comfortable invisibility. But Wednesday morning brought Claire to his desk at 7:30 a.m., holding 2 cups of coffee. "Peace offering," she said, setting 1 cup beside his keyboard, "for voluntarily taking on someone else's problem yesterday." Daniel stared at the coffee cup like it was a live grenade. Around them, the mostly empty office was beginning to fill with early arrivals, people who'd glance over and see Claire Morgan from business development bringing coffee to the network technician who never talked to anyone. "You didn't have to—" "I know, I wanted to." Claire leaned against his desk with the casual confidence of someone who'd never learned to be afraid of other people's opinions. "Plus, I figured out you're the person who keeps this entire building running. The printer on 4, the AC in the conference room, the break room coffee machine. People talk about the mysterious tech guy who fixes everything and never asks for credit. That's not—" Daniel reached for the coffee, if only to have something to do with his hands. "I just troubleshoot things. It's not mysterious." To those of us who barely understand how to unmute ourselves on Zoom calls, it absolutely is. Claire's smile was warm, genuine, completely oblivious to the way Daniel's carefully maintained boundaries were straining against her friendliness. "I'm in business development, which means I'm excellent at presentations and terrible at anything involving actual technology. So knowing there's someone who can make broken things work again feels like having a safety net." Daniel took a sip of the coffee. Perfect temperature, the right amount of cream, and tried to ignore the way her words settled somewhere dangerous in his chest. Being needed for his skills was safe. expected. Being appreciated as a person felt like standing too close to an edge. The facilities team handles most building issues, he said carefully. I just fill in when they're busy. And network operations? Who fills in for you? No one. That's why I need to. Daniel gestured at his monitors. At the morning diagnostics, he should have already started. Right, of course. I'll let you work. Claire pushed off from his desk but didn't immediately leave. Hey, random question. Is there a good place around here for lunch? Somewhere that's not the cafeteria or a sad desk salad? Daniel's mind went blank. He hadn't eaten lunch anywhere but his desk in years, usually while monitoring systems and answering tickets. The idea of lunch as a social activity felt foreign. There's a sandwich place 2 blocks south, he said finally, pulling up information from the distant past when he'd occasionally left the building midday. Decent food, reasonably priced. Want to show me sometime? As payment for the coffee machine rescue? The question was casual, friendly, probably innocent. But Daniel felt it like a hand reaching through the careful walls he'd built, offering connection he couldn't afford. I usually work through lunch, he said, the excuse automatic and well-practiced. Right, of course. Claire's smile didn't quite fade, but something shifted in her expression, not hurt exactly, but understanding. She'd tested a boundary and found it solid. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind. Thanks for the tech support, Daniel. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him alone with the coffee cup and the uncomfortable feeling that he'd just failed some test he hadn't known he was taking. The rest of Wednesday passed in the familiar rhythm of work that Daniel had perfected over years of practice. Tickets came in, he resolved them. Systems needed monitoring, he monitored them. Someone on the 5th floor couldn't connect to the VPN. He walked them through the solution remotely, without ever having to see them face to face. But he was aware, in a way that bothered him, of when Claire walked past his desk. Twice in the afternoon, heading to meetings with her laptop bag over her shoulder, she'd glanced in his direction. Not staring, not lingering, just the natural acknowledgement of someone who'd spoken to him that morning. Each time, Daniel had kept his eyes on his screen, maintaining the invisible barrier that kept him safe. Emma had art class after school on Wednesdays, which meant Daniel picked her up at 4:30 instead of 3:15. He used the extra time to finish documentation on a server upgrade, working in the increasingly empty office as people headed home. At 4:15, he was shutting down his workstation when he noticed Claire still at her desk 3 rows over, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand rubbing her temple in the universal gesture of frustration. Not his problem, not his business. He had to get Emma. Daniel gathered his things and headed for the elevator, telling himself that whatever issue Claire was dealing with had nothing to do with him. But as he passed her desk, he caught fragments of her conversation. Understand that, but I was told the presentation was tomorrow. No, I don't have those revisions, because no one sent me. A pause, her jaw tightening. Yes, I understand. I'll have it ready. She hung up as Daniel reached the elevator, and for just a moment their eyes met. Claire looked exhausted, the friendly confidence from that morning replaced by something raw and overwhelmed. Tech emergency? Daniel heard himself ask, the words escaping before he could stop them. Claire laughed, the sound bitter. Life emergency. Apparently I misread my email and a major presentation I thought was tomorrow is actually in... She glanced at her computer screen. 16 hours. And I don't have half the data I need. Can you get it tonight? If I can figure out how to access the analytics dashboard, which I absolutely cannot, because despite 3 training sessions, I still can't remember if I'm supposed to use my network login or my email or some completely different password I was supposed to create, but probably didn't. Daniel should have walked away, should have expressed sympathy and headed to his car and picked up Emma and maintained the careful separation between work and anything resembling personal investment. Instead, he set down his bag. Show me what you're trying to access. Claire's expression shifted from frustration to surprise, to something that looked dangerously close to relief. You don't have to. You were leaving. Show me, Daniel repeated, moving to stand behind her desk where he could see her monitor. It took him 7 minutes to identify the issue, a permissions error that had never been properly resolved when her account was created, and another 3 to walk her through the fix and get her into the dashboard. Claire watched his hands move across her keyboard with focused attention, taking notes, asking clarifying questions that told him she actually wanted to understand the solution rather than just having him fix it for her. "You're a lifesaver," she said when the data finally populated on her screen. "Seriously. I was about to call my manager in a panic, which would have been a fantastic impression to make in my second week." "It was just a permission setting," Daniel said, stepping back from her desk and reclaiming the professional distance he had temporarily abandoned. "You would have figured it out." "No, I really wouldn't have." Claire met his eyes, and there was something in her expression that made Daniel's careful defenses feel thin and inadequate. "Thank you. Really." Daniel nodded, not trusting himself to say more. He grabbed his bag and made it to the elevator before he could do something stupid, like offer to stay and help with the presentation itself. But as he drove to Emma's art class, he couldn't quite shake the image of Claire's relieved smile, the genuine gratitude that had nothing to do with professional obligation and everything to do with being helped when she needed it. Emma climbed into the car with paint-stained hands and stories about the landscape she'd created, chattering happily about colors and techniques while Daniel navigated traffic and tried to remember when someone had last looked at him the way Claire had, like he'd done something meaningful rather than just routine. Thursday morning, there was no coffee on his desk. Daniel told himself he wasn't disappointed, that the absence of Claire's gesture meant things could return to normal. He'd helped her with the work issue. She'd probably send a thank you email if she was the type, and that would be the end of their brief interaction. But at 11:30, his desk phone rang. "Network operations, this is Daniel." "Hey, it's Claire. I have what might be a really stupid question about the dashboard you helped me with yesterday." "Not stupid," Daniel said automatically, pulling up the remote access tool in case he needed to walk her through something. "What's the issue?" "Okay, so I understand how to pull the data now, but I'm trying to create a pivot table to organize it for the presentation, and Excel keeps giving me an error message that makes absolutely no sense." "What does the message say?" Claire read it to him, and Daniel immediately recognized the problem, a formatting issue with how the data was being selected. He could fix it in 30 seconds remotely, or spend 3 minutes explaining it to her so she could do it herself. "Walk me through your steps," he said, choosing the longer option for reasons he didn't want to examine too closely. For the next several minutes, Daniel talked Claire through pivot tables and data organization, his voice falling into the patient, methodical tone he used when teaching Emma about homework problems. Claire asked good questions, made connections between his explanations and other Excel functions she knew, and by the end of the call had successfully created the table she needed. "You're a miracle worker," she said, and Daniel could hear the smile in her voice. "This presentation is actually going to be coherent." "It's just Excel. You would have figured it out." "I really wouldn't have, but thank you for pretending I'm not technologically hopeless." A pause, then, "Hey, I know you said you work through lunch, but I'm doing a celebratory sandwich run to that place you mentioned. Want me to grab you something? My treat, as thanks for the repeated tech support." Daniel should have said no, should have maintained the boundary, kept the interaction professional, reinforced the invisible walls that protected him from complications. "Turkey and Swiss," he said instead. "No tomatoes." "Got it. See you in 45 minutes. She hung up before he could change his mind, leaving Daniel staring at his phone and wondering what exactly he was doing. The sandwich arrived at 12:20, delivered by Claire, who set it on his desk alongside a bag of chips and a bottle of iced tea. She didn't linger, didn't try to turn it into a lunch meeting, just smiled and returned to her own desk 3 rows over. But for the next 40 minutes, while Daniel ate and worked, he was aware of her presence in a way that felt both dangerous and oddly comforting. The office wasn't silent. Phones rang. Conversations happened. The ambient noise of professional life continued around them, but underneath it all was the quiet knowledge that someone had thought about what he might want for lunch, had remembered a detail he'd mentioned, had cared enough to follow through. It was such a small thing. Meaningless, really, in the larger context of their separate lives. But it had been 5 years since anyone had bought Daniel lunch. Friday brought a server crisis that consumed Daniel's entire morning and half his afternoon. A critical database had crashed, taking down key systems and leaving 3 departments unable to work. Daniel moved through the emergency with practiced efficiency, coordinating with his team, diagnosing the failure, implementing the fix while management hovered, and asked questions he didn't have time to answer. By 3 p.m., systems were restored and the crisis had passed. Daniel emerged from the server room exhausted, his shirt sleeves rolled up, aware that he'd missed lunch entirely and would have to rush to make Emma's pickup time. His desk had a paper bag on it. Inside, a sandwich from the place Claire had mentioned, a bag of chips, and a note in neat handwriting. Heard about the server apocalypse. Figured you'd be too busy saving the world to eat. See, Daniel stood there holding the bag, aware that people were watching him, the network tech who never socialized, receiving lunch from the new business development hire. He could feel the speculation beginning, the questions forming about whether something was happening between them. Nothing was happening. This was just a friendly gesture from someone who didn't understand the unwritten rules yet. But Daniel ate the sandwich at his desk and kept the note. That weekend passed in the usual rhythm of single parenthood. Saturday morning cartoons with Emma curled against his side. Grocery shopping where she insisted on helping push the cart. An afternoon at the park where Daniel pushed her on swings and tried not to compare her laughter to other kids who had two parents watching them play. Sunday was meal prep for the week, laundry, helping Emma practice reading, the ordinary mundane task that filled his life and kept him too busy to think about the ways it had become smaller than he'd ever imagined. Except this weekend, Daniel found his thoughts drifting back to the office, to conversations about pivot tables and permission settings, to the way Claire had looked at him when he'd helped her, like he'd done something worth remembering. Monday morning brought Claire to his desk at 7:25 a.m., before most people had arrived. "I have a confession," she said, no preamble. "I've been bothering you a lot this week, with questions and lunch deliveries and general technological incompetence, and I realized I never asked if that was okay." Daniel looked up from his monitor, surprised by the directness. "You haven't been bothering me." "I haven't been not bothering you either." Claire's expression was serious, thoughtful. "I'm good at reading people usually, but you're hard to read, Daniel Hayes, so I'm just going to ask directly. Am I crossing boundaries? Because you can tell me if I am. I'll back off. No hard feelings." It was such a strange question, delivered with such genuine concern, that Daniel found himself answering honestly for the first time in years. "No one asked me questions," he said quietly. "About work, about tech issues, sure. But about lunch, or if I want company, or if something I did was helpful, no one asked those things." "Why not?" "Because I don't encourage them to." Daniel gestured at his minimalist desk, at the careful absence of personal touches. "I keep to myself. It's easier that way." "Easier than what?" "Than letting people close enough to disappoint Emma when they leave. Than explaining why he didn't attend social events or why he never talked about his personal life. Than risking any connection that might require vulnerability he couldn't afford." "Just easier," Daniel said. Claire nodded slowly, like she heard all the things he hadn't said. "Okay. Well, for what it's worth, I appreciate the help you've given me, and I promise I'm not trying to complicate your life or cross professional boundaries or anything like that. I think you're interesting, and kind, and really good at fixing things." She walked away before Daniel could respond, leaving him with words that felt like gifts he didn't know how to accept. The week continued, developing a pattern that Daniel told himself wasn't a pattern. Claire would stop by his desk in the morning with coffee sometimes, other times not. She'd call with technical questions that were legitimate problems mixed with excuses to talk. They'd run into each other in the break room, in hallways, in the parking garage. Each interaction was brief, professional, completely appropriate. Each interaction also made Daniel's carefully constructed invisibility feel less like protection and more like a cage. Thursday afternoon, his desk phone rang at 3:45. "Daniel, it's Claire. I have what might be an actual emergency this time." "What's wrong?" "My car won't start. I'm in the parking garage. I've tried everything I know to try, and I have a client dinner across town in 90 minutes. I've called 3 towing companies, and the earliest anyone can get here is 6 p.m. Daniel glanced at the clock. Emma's pickup time was 4:15, giving him exactly 30 minutes. "What are the symptoms?" "It makes this clicking sound when I turn the key, but the engine won't turn over." "Probably the battery. Pop the hood. I'll be right there." He should have just told her how to call roadside assistance. Should have stayed at his desk and let professionals handle it. But Daniel found himself grabbing his keys and heading to the parking garage with the toolkit he kept in his car for emergencies. Claire's sedan was on level 3, hood already open. She stood beside it looking stressed and professional in her business attire, completely out of place in the concrete and fluorescent lights of the parking structure. "You didn't have to come down here," she said when she saw him. "I feel terrible pulling you away from work." "But I have jump cables," Daniel said, already assessing the battery connections. "This will take 5 minutes." It took 7 in the end. The battery was dead but jumped successfully, and Daniel ran the engine for several minutes to ensure it would hold the charge. Claire stood beside him watching, and in the close quarters of the parking garage, Daniel was acutely aware of her proximity, the faint scent of her perfume, the way she looked at him while he worked. "You're a lifesaver," she said when he finally gave her the all clear. "Seriously, I don't know what I would have done without you." Called roadside assistance. They would have done the same thing. In 3 hours, after I'd missed my client dinner and probably gotten fired. Claire stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see the exhaustion around her eyes, the stress she was barely managing. "You keep showing up when I need help. That's not nothing, Daniel. It's just, if you say just one more time, I'm going to argue with you." Claire's voice was soft but firm. "You helped me when you didn't have to. Multiple times now. That matters." Daniel should have stepped back, should have created distance, should have remembered that he had to pick up Emma in 8 minutes and couldn't afford to stand in parking garages having moments with women he barely knew. But Claire was looking at him with an expression that made his chest tight, like she saw past every wall he'd built and understood exactly what it cost him to maintain them. "I should go," he said, the words rough. "I have to—" "Your daughter." Claire's expression shifted to immediate understanding. "That's why you always leave at the same time. School pickup." Daniel froze. "How did you—" "The photo on your desk. And the fact that you turn down every after-work event but never explain why." Claire's smile was gentle, not pitying. "I'm observant. It's part of my job. I don't talk about her at work. I noticed. But you should know that having a daughter doesn't make you less interesting, Daniel. It makes you more." The words hit somewhere deep and unexpected. Daniel had spent 5 years treating fatherhood like something to hide at work, a complication that explained his unavailability without requiring real disclosure. Hearing Claire acknowledge it as though it were something admirable rather than limiting felt like permission for something he hadn't known he'd needed. "I really need to go," he said again, but this time it came out softer, less like escape. "Go. Be with your daughter. And Daniel?" Claire waited until he met her eyes. "Thank you for this and everything else." Daniel made it to Emma's school with 3 minutes to spare, his heart still pounding from something that wasn't exertion. Emma climbed into the car full of stories about science class and a new friend and a drawing she'd made that was hanging in the hallway. He listened to every word, responded to every question, gave her his full attention the way he always did. But part of his mind stayed in that parking garage, replaying the way Claire had looked at him, the things she'd said about his daughter, making him more interesting rather than less. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel found himself thinking about invisibility, about the armor he'd built, and whether it protected him or imprisoned him, about whether it was possible to be seen without being vulnerable, to allow connection without risking the kind of loss that had broken him 5 years ago. He didn't have answers, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was asking the questions. Friday morning, Claire wasn't at her desk when Daniel arrived. Her computer was on, her coffee cup sat half full beside her keyboard, but her chair was empty. Daniel told himself it wasn't his business, that her whereabouts weren't his concern. At 10 a.m., he saw her leaving a conference room, her expression carefully neutral in a way that set off alarm bells. She walked past his desk without looking over, head down, moving with the tight control of someone holding themselves together by force of will. Daniel made it until 10:30 before his concern overrode his boundaries. He found her in the break room, standing by the window with her arms crossed, staring out at the Seattle skyline. Her shoulders were rigid, her breathing too controlled. "Claire." She turned and he saw the barely contained emotion in her eyes. "Hey, I'm fine. I just needed a minute." "What happened?" "Nothing, just—" She stopped, seemed to recalibrate. "You know what? I don't know why I'm pretending. You're the closest thing I have to a friend in this building, which is probably sad given that we've known each other for 2 weeks, but it's true. The words landed hard. Closest thing I have to a friend, acknowledging something Daniel hadn't let himself name. Tell me, he said quietly. Claire laughed, the sound broken. My manager just informed me that I'm being assigned to a new client account, which is great, except it's being run by my fiance's firm, which means I'm going to be working directly with him on a professional basis while trying to maintain appropriate boundaries. And honestly, I don't know how I'm supposed to do that. The world tilted slightly. Fiancé. Of course she had a fiancé. Beautiful, kind, competent women didn't stay single, didn't spend their time bringing coffee to invisible network technicians and asking about their daughters. I didn't know you were engaged, Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral. It's not something I advertise. Claire's hand moved to her left ring finger, which Daniel now noticed was bare. I don't wear the ring to work. It complicates things. Complicates what? Everything. Claire met his eyes, and the raw honesty there made Daniel's chest ache. My engagement it's what my family wanted, what makes sense professionally. Marcus and I have known each other since college. Our parents are friends. He's brilliant and successful and objectively perfect for me. But I don't love him. The words came out quiet, definitive. I respect him. I care about him. But what we have it's not what I want. It's what everyone else wants for me. Daniel should have offered sympathy and walked away. Should have maintained professional distance and let Claire work through her personal complications without his involvement. Instead, he heard himself ask, "What do you want?" Claire looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. I want someone who sees me. Not the presentation I give in client meetings or the daughter my parents wanted or the perfect professional package. I want someone who sees who I actually am and thinks that's enough. The way she was looking at him made Daniel's carefully maintained boundaries feel irrelevant, like she was answering a question he hadn't asked but desperately needed to know. Claire, I should get back to work. She moved toward the door, then paused. Thank you for asking, for caring enough to check on me. That's not nothing, Daniel. She left before he could respond, leaving him alone in the break room with the uncomfortable knowledge that he'd just stepped over a line he couldn't uncross. That evening, Daniel sat in his car outside Emma's school and tried to process what had just happened. Claire was engaged but unhappy, trapped in a relationship that looked perfect from outside but felt wrong from within. None of that was his business. None of it should matter to him. But he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked when she'd said she wanted someone who saw her. Like maybe, just maybe, she thought he was that someone. It was impossible, ridiculous, completely inappropriate. He was a single father with a limited life and carefully controlled boundaries. She was engaged to someone objectively perfect, building a career that had no room for complications like a network technician who went home at 4 p.m. every day. Emma climbed into the car full of Friday energy, talking about weekend plans and asking if they could go to the movies. Daniel drove home on autopilot, responding to her questions while his mind stayed circling the same impossible thoughts. That night, after Emma was asleep, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Claire. Got your number from the company directory. Hope that's okay. I just wanted to say thank you again for checking on me today, and for being someone I can talk to. It means more than you probably realize. Daniel stared at the message for a long time before responding. You don't need to thank me. I'm glad I could help. 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, appeared again. Can I tell you something? And you can ignore this if it's too much, but I feel like you're the kind of person who appreciates honesty. Go ahead. The response took longer this time, like Claire was choosing her words carefully. When I'm with you, I feel like I can breathe. Like I don't have to perform or be perfect or live up to anyone's expectations. I know that probably sounds dramatic, and I promise I'm not trying to make things weird between us. But I wanted you to know that the way you see me, like I'm a real person instead of a collection of credentials, matters. It really matters. Daniel read the message 3 times, his heart pounding. He should set boundaries, should gently remind her about her engagement, should protect both of them from wherever this was heading. Instead, he typed the truth. You are a real person, the best kind. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, even if everyone else thinks they know what's best for me. Especially then. The conversation ended there, but Daniel lay awake long into the night, thinking about impossible situations, and the way Claire's smile made him feel like he'd forgotten how to be invisible. He'd spent 5 years building walls to protect himself and Emma from the kind of loss that broke everything. Those walls had worked, had kept them safe and steady and predictable. But standing in that parking garage, listening to Claire talk about wanting to be seen, Daniel had felt those walls start to crack. And the terrifying part was that he wasn't sure he wanted to repair them. The weekend stretched out differently than usual. Saturday morning found Daniel at the park with Emma, pushing her on the swings while his phone sat heavy in his pocket. Claire hadn't texted again after their conversation Friday night, and he told himself that was good, that the distance would let things settle back into safe professional territory. But Emma noticed something was off. "Daddy, you're not watching," she called from the top of the slide, her voice cutting through his distraction. Daniel looked up quickly, forcing a smile. "I'm watching, sweetheart. Go ahead." She slid down with her arms raised, landing with a thump and running back to the ladder. "You keep looking at your phone. Just checking work stuff. On Saturday?" Emma's skepticism was sharp for a 6-year-old. "You never check work on Saturday." She was right. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket and committed himself fully to the next hour, racing Emma across the playground, helping her across the monkey bars, being present in the way she deserved. But even as he laughed at her jokes and admired her climbing skills, part of his mind stayed circling the same impossible question. What exactly was happening between him and Claire Morgan? Sunday evening, while Emma watched a movie before bed, Daniel's phone finally buzzed. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about what you said, that I'm a real person and shouldn't let anyone convince me otherwise. Do you really believe that?" Daniel sat on his kitchen counter staring at the message. The truth was complicated, wrapped up in his own history of loss and self-protection. But Claire had asked for honesty, and something about her made lying feel impossible. "I believe you know what's right for you better than anyone else can, even if everyone else disagrees. That's a lonely position to be in." "Yes, it is." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before the next message came through. "Marcus proposed 6 months ago. Everyone was thrilled. My parents, his parents, our colleagues. It was this perfect moment at this perfect restaurant with this perfect ring. And all I could think was that I felt like I was watching someone else's life happen." Daniel's chest tightened. He knew that feeling, the disconnection between what your life looked like from outside and what it felt like from within. "Did you tell him that?" "I tried. He said it was normal to be nervous, that marriage is a big step, that once we got past the wedding planning stress, everything would feel right. And maybe he's correct. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Or maybe you're listening to yourself." The response was immediate. "When I'm with you, I listen to myself. When I'm with everyone else, I perform the version they expect." Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. Daniel had been performing a version of himself for 5 years, the dedicated single father, the reliable technician, the man who needed nothing beyond his work and his daughter. The performance had become so practiced he'd almost forgotten it was a performance. Almost. Until Claire had looked at him in a parking garage and seen something real underneath. "It makes sense," he typed back. "But Claire, I'm not the person who should be having this conversation with you. You're engaged. He stopped, unsure how to finish. "I'm damaged? I'm unavailable? I'm terrified of exactly this kind of connection?" "You're what?" "Complicated," Daniel settled on finally. "I have Emma and responsibilities and a life that doesn't have room for whatever this is. What if I'm not asking for room? What if I just want someone who tells me the truth?" Daniel stared at that message for a long time. The movie in the living room was ending. Emma would need to get ready for bed soon, and he was standing in his kitchen having a conversation that felt like standing on the edge of something that could change everything. "The truth is, you deserve better than someone who makes you feel like you're watching someone else's life," he typed. "You deserve someone who makes you feel like you're living your own. What if I think you might be that someone?" The words sat on his screen, impossible and terrifying, and more honest than anything anyone had said to him in years. Daniel didn't respond. He put the phone down, helped Emma get ready for bed, read her 3 chapters from their current book, and tucked her in with the same goodnight routine they'd had for years. Then he sat in his dark living room and forced himself to think clearly about what was actually happening. Claire was engaged to someone else. Unhappily engaged maybe, but engaged nonetheless. She was young, building a career, dealing with family pressure and professional complications that had nothing to do with him. The kindness she'd shown him, the conversations they'd shared, they could just as easily be her reaching out for friendship in a new workplace, looking for connection that had nothing to do with attraction or possibility. Except he'd seen the way she looked at him. He'd heard the things she wasn't quite saying. And he knew, with the kind of certainty that terrified him, that what was building between them was more than friendship. It was also impossible. Daniel had a 6-year-old daughter who'd already lost one parent and couldn't afford to lose another if this went wrong. He had a carefully constructed life built around stability and predictability. He couldn't afford to be the person Claire turned to while she figured out her engagement, couldn't afford to open doors that might lead to exactly the kind of loss he'd spent 5 years protecting himself from. But when he finally picked up his phone again, his response wasn't the careful boundary setting he knew he should send. "We should probably stop having these conversations," he typed. Then before he could reconsider, "But I don't want to." Monday morning arrived with the weight of everything unsaid. Daniel got to the office early, hoping to lose himself in work before the building filled with people and complications. But at 7:45, Claire appeared at his desk carrying 2 coffee cups and an expression that was equal parts nervous and determined. "We need to talk," she said quietly, setting 1 cup beside his keyboard. "But not here. Can you take a quick walk?" Daniel glanced around the mostly empty office. A few early arrivals sat scattered across the floor, none paying attention to them, but the glass walls and open layout made privacy impossible. "I have a system maintenance check scheduled. 5 minutes, please." There was something in her voice that made refusing impossible. Daniel saved his work and followed her to the elevator, neither of them speaking as they rode down to the ground floor and exited into the cool October morning. They walked half a block before Claire spoke, her voice low and urgent. "I told Marcus I needed space. Not a breakup, not yet, but time to think clearly without everyone's expectations weighing on me." She stopped, turning to face Daniel on the sidewalk, while early commuters flowed around them. "He thinks it's wedding stress. My parents think I'm being dramatic. Everyone has an opinion about what I should do except the one person whose opinion actually matters." "Claire, let me finish." "Please." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I know this is complicated. I know you have your daughter and your life and reasons to keep people at a distance. I'm not asking you to fix my problems or be my escape route or anything like that, but I need you to know that what I feel when I'm around you, it's real. It matters. And I can't keep pretending it doesn't." Daniel felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. Around them, the city was waking up, cars passing, people heading to work, the ordinary rhythm of a Monday morning. But standing on that sidewalk with Claire looking at him like he held answers to questions she'd been asking herself for months, nothing felt ordinary. "I can't be the reason you end your engagement," he said carefully. "That's not... I won't be responsible for that decision." "You're not." "I am." Claire's eyes were clear, certain. "I was unhappy before I met you, Daniel. You didn't create that. You just helped me see it clearly." "By doing what? Fixing your computer problems?" "By treating me like a person instead of a project. By being honest when everyone else tells me what they think I want to hear. By showing up, really showing up, when I needed help." Claire stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "You have no idea how rare that is." "I'm not special," Daniel said, the words rough. "I'm just someone who knows how to troubleshoot technical problems. You're someone who sees people, who pays attention, who fixes things because you genuinely want to help, not because you want credit or recognition." Claire's voice softened. "You're someone who makes me feel like I'm enough exactly as I am. Do you know how long it's been since I felt that way?" Daniel did know, because he knew exactly how long it had been since he'd felt seen that way. 5 years of invisibility, of keeping everyone at arm's length, of being the reliable technician who solved problems and then disappeared. Until Claire had looked at him and refused to let him disappear. "This is a bad idea," he said, but the conviction in his voice was wavering. "Your engagement, my daughter, our jobs, There are about 100 reasons this doesn't work. Name one that's about us, not about circumstances or other people or logistics. One reason why what's happening between us is wrong. Daniel opened his mouth and found he didn't have an answer, because the truth was that talking to Claire felt more right than anything had in years. The truth was that he'd spent the entire weekend thinking about her messages, her honesty, the way she made him want to be brave instead of safe. "I can't give you what you deserve," he said finally. "My life is complicated. Emma comes first, always. I leave work at 4 every day. I don't do spontaneous plans. I can't be the exciting relationship you probably want." "What if I want someone real instead of exciting?" Claire interrupted. "What if I want someone who shows up consistently instead of making grand gestures? What if everything you're describing sounds exactly like what I've been looking for?" The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable and impossible to dismiss. "We should get back," Daniel said, because he didn't trust himself to say anything else. "People will notice we're both gone." Let them notice. But Claire started walking back toward the building anyway, falling into step beside him. "I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now, Daniel. I just needed you to know where I stand. What happens next is up to both of us." They rode the elevator in silence, the space between them charged with everything they weren't saying. When the doors opened on the 3rd floor, they separated naturally, Claire heading to her desk, Daniel to his, but he felt the weight of her honesty settling into his chest like something permanent. The morning passed in a blur of work that Daniel completed on autopilot. His hands moved across keyboards, his eyes scanned diagnostic reports, his voice answered questions from colleagues who needed technical support. But his mind stayed circling the conversation on the sidewalk, Claire's clear-eyed certainty that what was building between them mattered. At 11:30, his manager appeared at his desk. "Daniel, got a minute?" Robert Chen was in his 50s, competent and direct, the kind of manager who left his team alone unless there was a problem. His presence at Daniel's desk in the middle of the day meant there was definitely a problem. "Of course. What's up?" "My office, if you don't mind." Daniel followed Robert to the corner office, his mind immediately running through possible work issues. Had he missed a critical ticket, made an error in the server migration? But Robert's expression wasn't angry, just carefully neutral, in a way that set off warning bells. Robert closed the door and gestured for Daniel to sit. "I'm going to be direct because I respect you too much to dance around this. I've received some informal feedback from colleagues about your interactions with Claire Morgan from business development." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What kind of feedback?" "The kind that suggests you two might be developing a relationship that goes beyond professional collaboration." Robert held up a hand before Daniel could respond. "I'm not making accusations. I'm not even saying there's a problem yet, but I need to have this conversation before there is one. We're not—" Daniel stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence honestly. "Claire is engaged. I've helped her with some technical issues, that's all." "I believe you, but perception matters, especially in a workplace environment. Coffee deliveries, lunch runs, extended conversations. People notice these things. And when one person is in a relationship and the other is a single parent, the speculation tends toward the dramatic." The words felt like a punch. Daniel had been so careful for 5 years, had maintained such strict boundaries, and now his first genuine connection with someone was being reduced to workplace gossip. "I haven't done anything inappropriate," he said quietly. "I know. Your professional conduct has been exemplary since you started here, and I have no reason to doubt that now." Robert's expression softened slightly. "But I also know that feelings don't always respect professional boundaries, and I need to make sure you understand the position you're in." "What position is that?" "Claire Morgan is engaged to Marcus Webb, who happens to be a senior partner at Kincaid and Associates, one of our largest client firms. Her family has significant connections in the business community. If this situation becomes complicated, the professional fallout could be considerable." Robert leaned forward, his voice dropping. "I'm not telling you who you can or can't have feelings for, Daniel, but I am telling you to be very, very careful about how you proceed." Daniel sat there absorbing the implicit threat wrapped in professional courtesy. His job wasn't being threatened, not directly, but the message was clear. Whatever was happening with Claire carried risks that extended far beyond personal heartbreak. "Understood," he said finally. "Good." Robert stood, signaling the conversation was over. Like I said, no accusations. Just a friendly heads up to think carefully about boundaries and professional conduct. That's all. Daniel returned to his desk feeling like he'd been doused in cold water. The morning's conversation with Claire, the tentative possibility that had been building between them, all of it suddenly felt reckless and naive. He'd been thinking about feelings and connection while forgetting the practical realities of their positions. Claire was engaged to someone powerful. Daniel was a network technician with a daughter to support and a job he couldn't afford to lose. The mathematics of that situation didn't work in favor of possibility. He made it to lunch without seeing Claire, deliberately choosing a route to the cafeteria that avoided her desk. But at 1:15, she appeared beside his cubicle, her expression worried. "Can we talk? I saw you go into Robert's office and you've been avoiding me ever since." "I'm not avoiding you, I'm working." "Daniel." Her voice dropped lower. "What happened?" He glanced around, acutely aware of the open office layout and the colleagues who were definitely not paying attention to them. "Not here." "Then where?" "Because you're shutting down and I need to know why." Daniel stood, grabbed his phone, and headed for the stairwell, the one place in the building where conversations stayed private. Claire followed without question, the heavy door closing behind them with an echo that felt final. "Robert knows," Daniel said without preamble. "About us? Or suspects enough to give me a warning disguised as friendly advice?" Claire's face went pale. "What kind of warning?" "The kind that reminds me you're engaged to a senior partner at one of our biggest client firms. The kind that suggests professional complications if this situation isn't handled carefully." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration and fear mixing into something that tasted like defeat. "He's right, Claire. I've been so focused on what's happening between us that I forgot about the reality of our positions. Our positions don't change how we feel. Maybe not, but they change what we can do about it." Daniel met her eyes, forcing himself to say the words that would protect them both. "You need to figure out your engagement without me complicating things. And I need to focus on my job and my daughter. What happened this morning, that conversation on the sidewalk, it can't happen again. You're running away." "I'm being realistic. There's a difference." Claire's expression shifted from worry to something sharper. "Is there? Because from where I'm standing, you're using logistics and professional concerns as an excuse to avoid something real, something that scares you." The words hit hard because they were true. Daniel was scared, terrified actually, of exactly what Claire represented: connection that mattered, vulnerability that could lead to loss, the possibility of letting someone close enough to hurt him and Emma if it all went wrong. "Maybe I am scared," he admitted, "but that doesn't make the concerns invalid. You have decisions to make about Marcus, about your engagement, about what you want your life to look like. Those decisions need to be yours, not influenced by whatever this is between us." "What if you're part of what I want my life to look like?" "Then you need to be sure of that before you blow up your engagement. Be sure enough that you won't regret it when the novelty of our conversations wears off, and you're left with the reality of dating a single father who leaves work at 4 and can't offer you the life someone like Marcus can." Claire stepped closer, her voice dropping to something fierce and certain. "You keep telling me what I want, what I deserve, what I should consider. But you're not listening to what I'm actually saying. I know my own mind, Daniel. I know what I'm walking away from and what I'm walking toward. Don't patronize me by assuming I haven't thought this through." "I'm not patronizing you." "Yes, you are. You're treating me like some naive kid who doesn't understand consequences instead of an adult woman making conscious choices about her own life." Claire's eyes were bright with frustration and something that looked like hurt. "I told Marcus I needed space before you and I had that conversation this morning. I've been questioning this engagement for months. You didn't create this situation, and you don't get to use protecting me as an excuse to protect yourself." The accusation hung in the stairwell, echoing off concrete walls. Daniel wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth was Claire had seen right through him. He was using her engagement and professional complications as shields against the real fear, that if he let her in, if he allowed himself to want this, the loss when it ended would destroy him. "I can't lose my job," he said quietly. "Emma depends on me. I can't be reckless with that." "I'm not asking you to be reckless. I'm asking you to be honest about what you feel instead of hiding behind logistics." Claire's voice softened. "I know you're scared, I'm scared too. But running away from something real because it might hurt later isn't protection, Daniel. It's just another kind of loss. Before he could respond, the stairwell door opened and two colleagues walked through, their conversation cutting off abruptly when they saw Daniel and Claire standing close in the confined space. The moment shattered, professionalism descending like a curtain. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt," one of them said with barely concealed curiosity. "You're not interrupting," Claire said smoothly, stepping back. "We were just finishing up." She left without looking at Daniel again, leaving him alone in the stairwell with the weight of everything they'd said and everything they hadn't. The afternoon crawled by. Daniel buried himself in work, accepting every ticket that came through, volunteering for tasks that kept him away from his desk and away from the possibility of running into Claire. But at 3:30, his phone buzzed with a text that made his carefully maintained focus crumble. "I'm sorry for pushing. You're right that I need to figure out my engagement without using you as a reason. But I'm not sorry for telling you how I feel. That was real, even if the timing is terrible." Daniel stared at the message, his chest tight. He should leave it unanswered, should maintain the distance he'd tried to create. But his fingers moved before his common sense could stop them. "I'm sorry too, for making you feel like I don't take your decisions seriously. You're not naive. You're brave in ways I'm not. We're both scared of different things. Maybe that's okay. Maybe. But I still think you need space to figure things out clearly. What if I don't want space from you?" Daniel closed his eyes, Emma's pickup time approaching, reality pressing in from all sides. What you want and what you need might be different things right now. The response took longer this time. "When did you become so wise about other people's lives while being so scared about your own?" The question hit like a physical blow because it was completely accurate. Daniel had spent 5 years being cautiously wise about his own life, making safe choices, protecting himself and Emma from risk. But wisdom built on fear wasn't wisdom at all. It was just another way of staying small. He didn't respond. Instead, he packed up his things and headed out to pick up Emma, grateful for the routine that grounded him when everything else felt unstable. Emma was quiet in the car, which was unusual enough that Daniel noticed even through his distraction. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" "Madison's parents are getting divorced," Emma said, her voice small. She was crying at lunch. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That must be really hard for her. She said her dad is moving to a different house. She has to go back and forth between them." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Is that what happened with my mom?" The question shouldn't have surprised him. Emma asked about Sarah periodically, trying to piece together a story that made sense. But coming now with Daniel's emotions already raw from the day's conversations, it felt like another weight added to an already crushing load. "Your mom and I were never married," Daniel said carefully, using the age-appropriate truth he'd developed. "She had to leave when you were very little because she was sick in a way that made it hard for her to be a mom. But that wasn't about you, Emma. It was never about you. Do you think she'll come back?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I hope she's getting the help she needs wherever she is." Emma processed this in silence for several blocks. "Madison said divorce means her parents don't love each other anymore. Did you and Mom love each other?" Daniel pulled into their apartment complex parking lot before answering, needing to see Emma's face for this conversation. "We cared about each other, but sometimes caring about someone isn't enough if they're dealing with things that are bigger than the relationship. Does that make sense?" "Not really." Emma's honesty was pure, uncomplicated. "But Madison said her dad is happier now. He smiles more. Maybe Mom is happier too, wherever she is." The simple wisdom of that statement made Daniel's throat tight. Maybe she is. "Are you happy, Daddy?" The question caught him completely off guard. Daniel looked at his daughter, 6 years old, perceptive beyond her years, watching him with eyes that saw more than he wanted her to see. "I'm happy when I'm with you," he said truthfully. "But what about when you're not with me? At work and stuff?" Daniel thought about invisibility, about 5 years of keeping himself small and separate, about coffee cups delivered to his desk, and conversations in parking garages, and the way Claire looked at him like he mattered. "I'm working on it," he told Emma, "being happier in all the parts of my life. It's harder than it sounds." Madison's dad said being happy is scary sometimes, because it means things might change. Out of the mouths of children, Daniel thought. or out of the mouths of divorcing fathers having profound conversations with 6-year-olds. That's very true, he said softly. Change is scary, but sometimes it's necessary. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Daniel found himself rereading his text conversation with Claire. Her words kept circling his mind. You're brave in ways I'm not. When did you become so wise about other people's lives while being so scared about your own? He'd spent 5 years being scared. Scared of loss, scared of vulnerability, scared of letting anyone close enough to matter. The fear had kept him and Emma safe, had created the stable, predictable life she needed. But it had also kept him frozen, unable to imagine anything beyond survival and routine. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. I talked to Marcus tonight. Really talked. Not just surface conversation. I told him, I'm not sure about the engagement, that I need real time and space to figure out what I want. He was hurt, but he listened. We're postponing any wedding planning until I'm certain. Daniel's heart rate picked up. How do you feel? Terrified, relieved, guilty. Like I'm disappointing everyone who's been planning this perfect future for me, but also like I can breathe for the first time in months. That's good, that you can breathe. Is it weird that I want to talk to you about it? You're probably the last person I should be texting right now. Probably. But I'm glad you did. 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. Daniel, I need you to understand something. Whatever I decide about Marcus, it's my decision. You're not responsible for it. You didn't manipulate me or pressure me or do anything wrong. You just existed in a way that made me realize I wanted something different. Can you accept that? Daniel stared at the message, recognizing the absolution she was offering. Permission to stop carrying guilt for feelings he hadn't chosen, for connection that had developed naturally despite his best efforts to prevent it. I can try, he typed back. But this still feels complicated. Life is complicated. That doesn't make it wrong. What happens now? Now I figure out what I want without the weight of everyone's expectations. And you stop hiding behind logistics and fear and start thinking about what you actually want. Deal? Daniel sat with that question. Emma asleep down the hall, his carefully constructed safe life suddenly feeling less like protection and more like a prison. Deal, he finally responded. But Claire, I can't promise anything. My life is what it is. I know. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking you to be honest with yourself about what you feel. What if being honest makes everything more complicated? Then we'll figure it out. Together, if you let me. As friends, if nothing else. Friends. The word should have felt safe, a boundary that made sense given their situations. But Daniel knew it was already too late for just friendship, that what he felt for Claire had crossed that line weeks ago in a parking garage when she'd whispered about wishing he were hers. Friends, he agreed, knowing it was a lie they were both willing to tell for now. Good night, Daniel. Thank you for listening. Good night, Claire. Daniel set down his phone and sat in the dark living room, listening to the quiet sounds of his apartment. The refrigerator humming, the distant traffic outside, the ordinary ambient noise of a life that had been the same for 5 years. Emma's question echoed in his mind. Are you happy, Daddy? He told her he was working on it, which was true. But working on happiness required being willing to change, to risk, to step out of the protective invisibility he'd built and actually live instead of just survive. The next morning brought an email from Robert Chen marked high importance. Daniel, need to discuss upcoming client integration project. Claire Morgan's team will be the primary business development contact. Given our conversation yesterday, wanted to check in about your comfort level working directly with her team. If there are concerns, I can reassign. Let me know. Daniel stared at the email, recognizing it for what it was. An out, if he wanted it. A way to maintain professional distance, to avoid the complications of working closely with someone who made him feel things he'd been avoiding for years. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. The safe answer would be to request reassignment, to protect himself and his job from potential complications. Instead, he typed, no concerns. Happy to work with business development on the integration project. He hit send before he could reconsider, his heart pounding with the recognition that he'd just chosen possibility over safety. At 9 a.m., Claire appeared at his desk with a tablet and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Robert said you'd be our technical lead for the Kincaid integration. I have the project brief if you have time to review it. Of course, Daniel accepted the tablet, acutely aware that several colleagues were watching their interaction with poorly disguised interest. Conference room might be better for this discussion. They walked to an empty conference room in silence, the glass walls providing visibility, while the closed door offered enough privacy for real conversation. Claire sat across from him and immediately dropped the professional facade. You didn't have to say yes to this project. Robert would have reassigned you if you'd asked. I know. Then why didn't you? Daniel looked at the project brief without really seeing it. Because you were right yesterday. I was using logistics as an excuse to avoid something real, and I'm tired of being scared. Claire's expression shifted, hope and caution mixing into something that made his chest ache. What does that mean? It means I'm not going to run away from whatever this is. But I'm also not going to rush into anything that could hurt you or Emma, or blow up both our lives. Daniel met her eyes, forcing himself to be as honest as she'd been. I care about you, Claire, more than I should given the situation, and that terrifies me because I don't know how to do this. How to let someone in after years of keeping everyone out. So we figure it out, together. While you sort out your engagement and I figure out how to be something other than Emma's dad and a network technician, while we work together professionally and pretend we don't feel whatever this is? If that's what it takes, Claire leaned forward, her voice firm. I'm not asking for easy, Daniel. I'm asking for honest. Can you do that? Daniel thought about Emma asking if he was happy, about 5 years of invisible armor, about the way Claire made him feel like he'd forgotten how to breathe and learned how at the same time. I can try, he said finally. Then that's enough. For now. Claire opened the actual project brief, her professional mask sliding back into place. Now, let's talk about this integration timeline, because it's completely unrealistic, and I need your technical expertise to explain why to the client. They spent the next 40 minutes discussing servers and data migration and timeline constraints, their conversation perfectly professional. But underneath it ran a current of something else, an awareness that made every casual brush of hands when passing documents feel significant. When they finally emerged from the conference room, Daniel felt like he'd made a decision without quite understanding all its implications. He'd chosen to stay instead of run, to be honest instead of safe, to see where this impossible situation might lead instead of shutting it down before it could hurt him. It was terrifying. It was reckless. It was probably going to end badly. But for the first time in 5 years, Daniel felt like he was actually living instead of just surviving. And that had to mean something. The Kincaid integration project became their cover, the professional justification for conversations that stretched longer than necessary, and meetings that felt charged with everything they weren't saying. 2 weeks passed in a strange rhythm of careful distance and unavoidable proximity, Claire presenting data while Daniel explained technical constraints, their hands brushing when passing documents, their eyes meeting across conference tables in moments that lasted seconds too long. The office gossip didn't disappear, but it shifted. People saw them working together, saw the professional collaboration, and the speculation cooled into something more acceptable. Just the tech lead and the business development rep doing their jobs, nothing scandalous to see. Except every shared glance felt like a secret. Every exchanged text about project timelines carried subtext about things that mattered more than servers and migration schedules. Daniel found himself thinking about Claire at odd moments, while helping Emma with homework, while running diagnostics on network equipment, while lying awake at night in the dark. The way she argued passionately about client needs, the way she listened when he explained technical concepts, the way she'd started bringing him coffee again but now left it on his desk without fanfare, a quiet gesture that said, "I'm thinking about you," without requiring acknowledgement. 3 weeks after their conversation in the conference room, Claire's text came through at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night. I ended it. Officially. Gave Marcus back the ring tonight. Daniel stared at his phone, his heart pounding. He was sitting on his couch, Emma asleep, the apartment quiet around him. The words on the screen felt monumental, world-shifting, terrifying. How are you feeling? Like I just stepped off a cliff. Like I can finally breathe. Like I'm disappointing everyone who matters except myself. A pause, then, he took it better than I expected. Said he'd known for a while that my heart wasn't in it. Asked if there was someone else. What did you tell him? The truth. That there's someone who makes me feel seen in ways I've never felt before. But that's not why I'm ending this. I'm ending this because I deserve to choose my own life. Daniel's chest felt tight. Did you tell him it was me? No, that's private. That's ours. Whatever it is. Claire, people are going to assume, your family, his firm. Let them assume. I'm done living my life based on what other people think. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I'm not asking you for anything, Daniel. I just wanted you to know, because you matter to me, and I wanted you to hear it from me first. Daniel sat with that knowledge, the weight of her decision settling into his bones. She'd ended her engagement, had chosen herself over expectations, and now everything between them had shifted from theoretical to terrifyingly real. Do you regret it? He asked. Not even a little. I'm scared about what comes next, but I don't regret choosing honesty. What does come next? I don't know. I need time to figure out who I am without everyone else's expectations. Time to build the life I actually want instead of the one I thought I should want. A longer pause this time. But I'd like you in that life if you want to be. In whatever way feels right. Daniel closed his eyes, Emma's voice echoing in his memory. Are you happy, Daddy? He'd been working on it, he'd told her. Working on being brave enough to want more than just survival. I want to be, he typed back. But I need to be careful for Emma's sake. I know, I wouldn't expect anything else. And I need to be honest with you about what my life looks like. I leave at 4 every day. I have a 6-year-old who comes first, always. I can't do spontaneous dinner plans or weekend trips or any of the things someone your age probably wants. What if I want someone who shows up consistently instead of someone exciting? What if I want to be part of a life that has real priorities and real meaning? The question hung there, an echo of what she'd said weeks ago in the parking garage. Daniel thought about his careful, contained life, the walls he'd built to protect himself and Emma, the way Claire had somehow slipped through those walls without him noticing until it was too late to keep her out. Then maybe we can figure out what that looks like, he finally responded. Slowly, carefully. I can do slow and careful. I'm good at slow and careful. Liar. You ended your engagement and texted me about it 2 hours later. Okay, fair point. I'm working on slow and careful, with you as my teacher. Daniel smiled despite himself, despite the fear still churning in his chest. This is probably a terrible idea. Probably. But I'm tired of only doing sensible things. Your family is going to have opinions about this. They have opinions about everything. I'm done caring. Another pause. My mom called me 3 times tonight. I didn't answer. I know I'll have to eventually, but right now I just want to sit with this decision and know it was the right one. Was it? Yes. Absolutely yes. Even if it means disappointing everyone, even if it means starting over, even if it scares me, yes. Daniel sat with that certainty, wishing he could feel the same sureness about his own choices. But fear was still his constant companion, the voice that reminded him of everything that could go wrong, everyone who could get hurt. Get some sleep, he finally typed. Tomorrow is going to be hard enough without being exhausted. Are you going to be weird at work? Now that you know? Probably. I'm naturally weird. You're naturally careful. There's a difference. Same thing. Not even close. Good night, Daniel. Thank you for being someone I can tell the truth to. Good night, Claire. Friday morning arrived heavy with unspoken tension. Daniel got to the office early, hoping to avoid the moment when Claire walked in, when he'd have to see her face and know that everything had changed. But she was already at her desk when he arrived, her computer on, her posture rigid in a way that told him the night hadn't ended peacefully. He made it to his desk without catching her attention, but at 8:15 his phone buzzed. My mother showed up at my apartment at 6 a.m. Apparently Marcus called her last night. She's furious. Are you okay? Define okay. I'm still employed and no longer engaged, so I'm counting that as a win. Daniel wanted to ask what her mother had said, wanted to offer comfort, but his desk phone rang before he could respond. Hayes. Daniel, it's Margaret from HR. Can you come down when you have a moment? His stomach dropped. Is this about the Kincaid project? Just come down when you're available. Thanks. The line went dead, leaving Daniel staring at his phone and trying not to panic. HR calls were never good, especially not delivered in that carefully neutral tone that meant someone was trying very hard not to reveal anything over the phone. He locked his computer and headed downstairs, aware that Claire was watching him leave, her expression worried. Margaret's office was small and windowless, the kind of space designed for difficult conversations. She gestured for Daniel to close the door and sit, her professional smile not reaching her eyes. "I'll be direct. I received a call this morning from Catherine Morgan, Claire Morgan's mother. She had some concerns about her daughter's professional conduct and wanted to discuss Claire's working relationships here at Meridian." Daniel felt his blood run cold. What kind of concerns? The kind that suggests Claire may have developed an inappropriate relationship with a coworker that influenced some recent personal decisions. Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Morgan specifically mentioned you by name. Claire and I worked together on the Kincaid integration. That's all." "Is it? Because Mrs. Morgan seems to have very specific information about coffee deliveries, lunch runs, and extended private conversations." "We're colleagues. We talk about work." "In stairwells? In parking garages after hours?" Margaret pulled out a folder, opening it to reveal printed screenshots of the building's security camera logs. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Daniel, but I need to understand the nature of your relationship with Claire Morgan, because her mother is threatening to file a formal complaint about workplace harassment." The word hit like a physical blow. "Harassment? Claire initiated most of our interactions. She brought me coffee. She asked for help with technical issues." "I know. And nothing you've done appears to violate any policies." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "But perception matters, especially when powerful people are involved. Mrs. Morgan is a significant donor to several organizations our CEO cares about. If she pushes this formally, it becomes a PR issue that goes beyond the facts." Daniel sat there, the careful life he'd built crumbling around him. He'd tried to be smart about this, tried to maintain boundaries, and now he was sitting in HR being accused of harassment because a young woman had ended her engagement and her mother needed someone to blame. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now I document this conversation. I speak with Claire to get her perspective. And I recommend to Robert that you be reassigned from the Kincaid project to avoid any appearance of impropriety." Margaret's voice dropped lower. "Unofficially, I believe you. I've seen the security footage, I've talked to colleagues, and nothing suggests you did anything wrong. But officially, I have to protect the company, which means protecting it from the appearance of a problem, even if there isn't one." "I understand. Do you want to tell me anything else? Anything that might help me push back against Mrs. Morgan's narrative?" Daniel thought about Claire's texts, about conversations in stairwells and confessions in parking garages, about the way she'd looked at him and made him feel like he mattered. All of it was private, personal. None of it was anyone's business but theirs. "Claire Morgan is engaged in making her own decisions about her life," he said carefully. "If her mother doesn't approve of those decisions, that's between them. I'm just a technician who fixed some computers." Margaret studied him for a long moment. "Okay. I'll talk to Claire this afternoon. In the meantime, consider yourself unofficially advised to maintain strict professional distance. No private conversations, no personal texts, nothing that could be construed as inappropriate. Clear?" "Clear." Daniel returned to his desk, feeling like he'd been punched. Around him, the office continued its normal Friday rhythm, people chatting about weekend plans, phones ringing, the ordinary flow of professional life. But everything felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that someone was watching, judging, constructing narratives about his actions. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "HR just called me down." "What's happening?" "Your mother called them. Accused me of harassment." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then his phone actually rang, Claire's name on the screen. "Don't answer that," Robert said, appearing beside Daniel's desk. "Not here, not now. Margaret just briefed me on the situation. You need to stay completely professional until this is resolved." "I didn't do anything wrong." "I believe you, but right now belief doesn't matter. Optics matter." Robert's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Go home early today. Use the afternoon to get some distance. Come back Monday ready to focus solely on work. Understood?" "What about the Kincaid project?" "Sarah Chen is taking it over. You're being reassigned to infrastructure upgrades." Robert lowered his voice. "This isn't punishment, Daniel. This is protection. For you and for Claire. Whatever is or isn't happening between you two, it needs to stop until the engagement drama settles down." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself and Claire, wanted to rage against the injustice of being blamed for someone else's courage to leave an unhappy relationship. But he had Emma to think about, a job to protect, a life that couldn't afford the luxury of righteous anger. "Understood," he said quietly. He packed up his things and left at 10:30 a.m., the earliest he'd left work in 5 years. The drive home felt surreal. Streets that should have been full of morning traffic nearly empty, the world operating on a schedule that didn't match his own. His phone buzzed continuously with texts from Claire, each one more desperate than the last. "Please talk to me. I'm so sorry. I had no idea my mother would do this. I told HR the truth, that you've been nothing but professional and kind. Please don't disappear on me. Not now." Daniel sat in his parked car outside his apartment building, reading the messages and feeling the weight of impossible choices pressing down. He could respond, could offer comfort, could tell Claire that none of this was her fault. But doing so would violate the direct order he'd just received, would risk his job, would potentially make everything worse. Or he could protect himself, pull back, return to the safe invisibility he'd maintained for 5 years before Claire had smiled at him in a break room and made him forget why he'd built those walls in the first place. His fingers moved across the keyboard before his careful, rational mind could stop them. "None of this is your fault. You made brave choices and your mother is trying to punish you for them. Don't let her make you doubt yourself." The response was immediate. "But they're punishing you instead." "I'm fine. I have my job. I have Emma. I'll survive this." "What about us?" Daniel stared at that question, the two words that held everything that mattered and everything that felt impossible. What about them? What about the connection that had developed despite his best efforts to prevent it? The feelings he'd finally admitted? The possibility that had felt real for approximately 10 minutes before reality crushed it? "There can't be an us right now," he typed, each word feeling like a small death. "Not with your mother threatening formal complaints. Not with HR watching. Not with both our jobs at risk. You need space to figure out your life without this complication. You're not a complication. You're the only thing that feels right. Claire, please, I'm asking you to let this go. For both our sakes." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times, and Daniel could almost see her on the other end, fighting against the truth of what he was saying. Is this really about protecting our jobs? Or are you running away again? The question hit hard because Daniel honestly didn't know the answer. Was he being smart and cautious? Or was he using external pressure as an excuse to retreat back into the safety of isolation? "Does it matter?" he finally responded. "The result is the same either way. It matters to me. Then I'm protecting us both. From drama, from professional fallout, from rushing into something neither of us is ready for. Don't tell me what I'm ready for. Fine, I'm not ready. I thought I was, but sitting in HR being accused of harassment for the crime of caring about someone, I'm not strong enough for that, Claire. I'm sorry." The confession felt like tearing something open, exposing vulnerability he'd spent years hiding. Daniel sat in his car, phone in hand, waiting for her response and dreading it in equal measure. When it finally came, it was just 3 words. "I understand. Goodbye." The finality of it felt wrong. Felt like giving up just when things were getting difficult. But Daniel forced himself to set down the phone, to accept that sometimes caring about someone meant protecting them from the mess your life had become. He went inside his apartment and sat in the dark living room, feeling the familiar weight of isolation settling back over him like an old coat. This was safer, he told himself. This was smarter. Emma needed stability, not a father involved in workplace drama and family conflicts. But when his phone buzzed 2 hours later with a text from his sister asking if Emma could stay the weekend, Daniel found himself saying yes, even though he had no plans and no reason to need the time alone. Except he did need it. Needed to sit with the loss of something that had barely begun. Needed to feel the full weight of choosing safety over possibility. Needed to remember why he'd built his walls in the first place. By Monday morning, the office had moved on to other gossip. Claire's mother's threatened complaint had apparently been withdrawn after Claire had a conversation with her that Daniel could only imagine. Margaret sent him a brief email confirming the matter was closed and thanking him for his cooperation. Claire sat at her desk 3 rows over, professional and distant, no longer glancing in his direction when she walked past. The coffee deliveries stopped. The texts stopped. The project meetings that had given them excuses to talk became unnecessary as Sarah Chen took over the integration work. Daniel told himself this was what he'd wanted, a return to the careful, invisible life he'd perfected. No complications, no risks, no possibility of loss. But Emma noticed the change in him, the way he'd gone quiet again in ways that had nothing to do with his natural reserve. "Are you sad, Daddy?" she asked one night at dinner. "No, sweetheart. Just tired." "You look sad." Her 6-year-old certainty was unshakable. "Like when you think I'm not looking." Daniel met his daughter's eyes and saw too much understanding there, too much awareness that her father had briefly been different, lighter, maybe, or more present, and had now reverted to the contained version she'd always known. "Sometimes adults have to make hard choices," he said quietly, "choices that are right, but still feel sad." Was it the right choice? Daniel thought about Claire's final text, "I understand. Goodbye," and wondered if choosing safety over happiness could ever really be right, or if it was just easier to live with. "I hope so," he told his daughter, the only honest answer he had. 3 weeks passed in careful silence. Daniel moved through his days with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of being functional while hollow. He fixed servers, answered tickets, left at 4 o'clock sharp to pick up Emma. The routine was familiar, comfortable even, except for the way it now felt like walking through a life that belonged to someone else. Claire remained professionally distant, their interactions limited to the occasional passing in hallways where they nodded politely and kept moving. Daniel told himself this was better, safer, the natural conclusion to something that should never have started in the first place. But he'd catch glimpses of her sometimes, through conference room windows during client meetings or leaving the building at the end of the day, and the ache in his chest would remind him that some losses weren't easily dismissed just because they made logical sense. Emma had stopped asking if he was sad, but she'd become more clingy in the evenings, wanting extra stories before bed, requesting his presence for homework that she could easily do alone. Children had radar for their parents' emotional states, and Emma's radar was finely tuned after 5 years of having only one parent to depend on. "Madison invited me to her birthday party," Emma said one evening while Daniel made dinner. "It's at that place with the trampolines. Can I go?" "When is it?" "Saturday. Her mom said she'd pick me up if you have to work." Daniel paused in the middle of chopping vegetables. He never worked Saturdays. Emma knew that. The fact that she was offering him an out suggested she thought he needed one. "I don't have to work," he said carefully. "I'll take you and stay. That's how birthday parties work." "You don't have to stay. Madison's mom said parents can drop off." "Do you want me to drop off, or would you rather I stayed?" Emma was quiet for a moment, her 6-year-old face serious in a way that made Daniel's chest tight. "I want you to stay, but you seem like you need alone time lately." The observation was so accurate, so heartbreakingly perceptive, that Daniel had to set down the knife and crouch beside her chair. "I always want to be with you," he said quietly. "If I've seemed distant, that's my problem, not yours. You don't need to worry about giving me alone time, okay?" "Are you sure?" "Completely sure." Daniel pulled her into a hug, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. "I'll stay at the party. I'll even jump on the trampolines if you want." Emma giggled, the sound lightening something in Daniel's chest. "You're too old for trampolines." "I'm 32, not 90. I can handle trampolines." "Okay, but if you break something, I'm telling everyone you're not my dad." Daniel laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd managed in weeks. "Deal." That Saturday, he kept his promise. The trampoline park was chaos. 20 screaming 6-year-olds hopped up on cake and adrenaline, parents clustered in small groups making awkward conversation while trying to keep track of their children. Daniel found a spot along the wall where he could watch Emma bounce with her friends, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. "First time here?" A woman's voice beside him, friendly and curious. Daniel glanced over to find Madison's mother, a cheerful blonde woman he'd met briefly at school pickup. "First time. It's louder than I expected. Just wait until they start the dodgeball game, then it gets really chaotic." She extended her hand. "I'm Jennifer, by the way. We've met at school, but I don't think we've ever actually talked." "Daniel. And thanks for inviting Emma. She's been excited about this all week." "She's a sweetheart. Madison talks about her constantly." Jennifer leaned against the wall beside him, watching the kids with the practiced eye of an experienced parent. Emma mentioned you're a single dad? The question was casual, but Daniel heard the real inquiry beneath it. The eternal question single parents asked each other, trying to determine if the situation was death, divorce, or something else entirely. Her mother left when Emma was 1, he said, the explanation he'd perfected over years of similar questions. It's been just the two of us since then. That must be incredibly hard. We manage. Emma's amazing, which makes it easier. Jennifer nodded, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence, watching the organized chaos unfold. Then she said, Madison's dad and I divorced last year. Amicable mostly, but still hard on her. She asks about your family sometimes. I think she's trying to understand that families come in different shapes. Emma does the same thing, asks about other kids' parents, trying to piece together what's normal. Is there such a thing as normal anymore? Jennifer's laugh was wry. I used to think so. Now I think we're all just figuring it out as we go. The conversation drifted to safer topics, school schedules, upcoming holidays, the logistical nightmares of elementary school birthday parties. It was easy, uncomplicated, the kind of interaction Daniel had avoided for years, but found surprisingly pleasant now that he was forced into it. When the party ended and Daniel drove Emma home, sugar-crashed and happy in the back seat, he felt something shift slightly in his chest. Maybe isolation wasn't the only option. Maybe there were ways to be present in the world that didn't require the kind of vulnerability that had gotten him hurt. But that night, after Emma was asleep, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Jennifer from the party. Got your number from the school directory. Hope that's okay. Madison had a great time and asked if Emma could come over for a play date sometime. Let me know if you're interested. Daniel stared at the message, recognizing it for what it was, a friendly overture, possibly just about the kids, possibly about something more. 6 months ago, he would have politely declined. But 6 months ago, he hadn't met Claire Morgan and learned what it felt like to be seen. Sounds great. Let me know when works for your schedule. The response was immediate. How about next Saturday? The girls could play and maybe we could grab coffee while they're occupied. There's a place near my house with a decent playground. It was just coffee. Just 2 single parents coordinating kid schedules. Nothing complicated, nothing that required emotional vulnerability. Except Daniel's first thought was whether Claire would care that he was having coffee with someone else. And the fact that he was thinking about Claire at all told him he was nowhere near as over this as he needed to be. Sounds good, he typed back, forcing himself to commit before overthinking could sabotage the simple human connection being offered. Monday morning brought unexpected disruption to the office routine. Daniel arrived at his usual time to find a cluster of people gathered in the break room, their voices carrying the particular tone that meant something significant had happened. Did you hear? Someone said as he passed. Claire Morgan resigned, turned in her notice this morning. Daniel felt the world tilt slightly. He made it to his desk on autopilot, his mind racing. Resigned. Claire had quit her job, the position she'd been so excited about when she'd started 3 months ago. His phone buzzed with the text from Robert. Need to see you, my office when you get a chance. Daniel grabbed his coffee and headed to Robert's office, his stomach churning with possibilities. Robert was on a call when he arrived, but waved him in, gesturing for him to sit. Yeah, I understand, Robert was saying into his phone. No, we'll handle the transition professionally, thank you. He hung up and rubbed his temples, looking exhausted. That was Claire's mother. Again. What happened? Claire resigned effective immediately, cited hostile work environment. Robert's expression was carefully neutral. Before you panic, she didn't name you specifically in her resignation letter. But Catherine Morgan is making it very clear she blames you for her daughter's recent life choices. I haven't spoken to Claire in 3 weeks. I followed every guideline HR gave me. I know. And officially, this has nothing to do with you. But unofficially, I wanted you to know what's happening so you're not blindsided by any potential fallout. Robert leaned back in his chair. Claire's mother is influential, and she's angry that her daughter ended a prestigious engagement and is now leaving a job at a respected company. She needs someone to blame, and unfortunately, you're the convenient target. What does that mean for me? Nothing, if I can help it. You've done nothing wrong, and I'll make sure anyone who asks knows that. Robert's voice dropped lower. But Daniel, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything between you and Claire that I should know about? Anything that could come back and bite us if Mrs. Morgan pushes this further? Daniel thought about parking garages and stairwell conversations, about texts that had crossed from professional into personal, about the way Claire had looked at him and made him believe he could be brave enough to want something more than survival. We became friends, he said carefully. She helped me remember that being a single parent doesn't mean being invisible. I helped her realize she deserved to make her own choices. That's all. It wasn't all, not even close, but it was the truth that mattered in this context, the version that protected them both. Okay. Robert studied him for a long moment. For what it's worth, I think Claire made her own decisions. Good decisions, probably, even if her mother disagrees. And I think she's lucky to have had someone who treated her like a person instead of a prize to be won. The unexpected support made Daniel's throat tight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Just keep your head down and let this drama blow over. And Daniel, maybe consider that hiding from life to avoid complications isn't actually protecting anyone. Sometimes it's just another way of being alone. The words followed Daniel back to his desk, settling into his chest like something he didn't want to examine too closely. He buried himself in work, fixing problems that had clear solutions, avoiding the messier questions about what Claire's resignation meant and whether he should reach out to check on her. His phone made the decision for him at 2 p.m. I know we're not supposed to talk, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I resigned today. This has nothing to do with you or what happened. I just can't keep working in a place where my mother has influence over my professional life. I need a clean start. Daniel stared at the message, his heart pounding. He should follow Robert's advice, should maintain distance, should let Claire build her new life without his interference. But the image of her walking away from a job she'd been good at, uprooting her professional life because of family pressure, made something in him rebel against the safe choice. Are you okay? He typed back. The 3 dots appeared immediately. I'm terrified and relieved in equal measure. I have some savings. I'm going to take a month to figure out what I actually want to do with my life instead of what everyone thinks I should do. That's brave. It's reckless. But I'm tired of being sensible. Where will you go? What will you do? I don't know yet. That's the scary part. But also the exciting part? A pause, then. I'm sorry this affected your job. My mother had no right to involve you in her disappointment with my choices. I'm fine. Still employed, still fixing computers? Some things never change. Some things should change. You deserve more than just fixing computers and going home, Daniel. The statement hit harder than it should have. I have Emma. That's enough. Is it? Or is it just safer than wanting more? Daniel sat at his desk, surrounded by colleagues working through their ordinary Monday afternoons, and felt the careful walls he'd rebuilt over the past 3 weeks crack slightly. I don't know how to want more without risking everything, he admitted. Then maybe start small. Want one thing, just one, and see what happens. What if the one thing I want is impossible? What if it's not? Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang with Emma's school number. His heart jumped into his throat. They never called during the day unless something was wrong. This is Daniel Hayes. Mr. Hayes, this is Nurse Patterson at Riverside Elementary. Emma's fine, but she fell on the playground and hit her head. She's alert and talking, no signs of serious injury, but our policy is to call parents for any head injuries. Can you come pick her up? I'll be there in 15 minutes. Daniel grabbed his keys and practically ran for the elevator, sending a quick text to Robert about the emergency. The drive to Emma's school felt endless, every worst-case scenario playing through his mind despite the nurse's reassurance that she was fine. Emma was sitting in the nurse's office when he arrived, holding an ice pack to her forehead and looking more annoyed than hurt. I'm fine, Daddy. They're being dramatic. Let me see. Daniel crouched in front of her, gently moving the ice pack to examine the small bump forming above her right eye. What happened? Madison and I were racing, and I tripped. It's not even that bad. Nurse Patterson stepped forward with a clipboard. She didn't lose consciousness, no nausea or dizziness. Pupils are equal and reactive, but we recommend monitoring for the next 24 hours just to be safe. Keep her home from school tomorrow if possible. Daniel signed the necessary forms and guided Emma to the car, his heart rate finally settling back to normal. She chattered the entire drive home about how the fall had actually been kind of cool, and how she'd beaten Madison to the fence before tripping, completely unconcerned about the injury that had sent Daniel into a panic. At home, he settled her on the couch with her favorite movie and an ice pack, then texted his sister to let her know what had happened. His phone buzzed with Claire's response to their earlier conversation. "Is everything okay? You disappeared mid-conversation." "Emma fell at school. Minor head injury, but I had to pick her up. She's fine. Scary. I'm glad she's okay." "Me too. Sorry for disappearing." "Don't apologize. Your daughter comes first. That's exactly how it should be." Daniel sat in his kitchen while Emma watched her movie, staring at that message and feeling something shift in his chest. Claire understood. She'd never once questioned his priorities, never made him feel like being a father was a limitation. She'd simply accepted it as part of who he was and valued him anyway. "The thing I want," he typed slowly. "The impossible thing. It's not actually impossible. I just convinced myself it was because being scared felt safer than being brave. And now I'm sitting in my kitchen realizing that I pushed away someone who made me feel less alone for the first time in 5 years. And I don't know how to fix that." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. "You could start by admitting you want to fix it. Out loud. To the person it matters to. I'm admitting it now. I mean, in person. Not hiding behind text messages." Daniel's heart rate picked up. "Claire, I'm not asking for promises or grand gestures. I'm just asking you to be honest about what you feel, what you want, what you're afraid of. Can you do that?" He thought about Emma in the next room, about the job he'd almost lost, about all the practical reasons this was still complicated. But he also thought about Robert's words, that hiding from life wasn't actually protecting anyone, it was just another way of being alone. "Yes," he typed, "I can do that. But not today. Emma needs me to monitor her head injury." "Tomorrow then. After work. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from your office. I'll be there at 4:30. "I can't. Emma, can stay with your sister for an hour. This is important enough to ask for help, Daniel." She was right. This was important enough, scary enough, real enough to require him to actually show up instead of hiding behind logistics and fear. 4:30, he confirmed. "I'll be there." That night, after ensuring Emma showed no concerning symptoms and getting her settled in bed, Daniel called his sister. "Can you pick up Emma from school tomorrow and keep her for an hour or 2? "Of course. Everything okay?" "I have something I need to do, something important." His sister was quiet for a moment. "Does this something have to do with why you've been moping around for the past month?" "I haven't been moping." "You've absolutely been moping. Emma told me you get sad when you think she's not looking." Daniel closed his eyes, embarrassed that his 6-year-old had been reporting his emotional state to his sister. "I'm working on it." "Good. It's about time. Emma needs you happy, not just functional." A pause. "Is this about a woman?" "It's about me figuring out how to be honest about what I want instead of hiding from it. Even better. Go do your important thing. Emma will be fine with me." Tuesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel moved through his work distracted, checking the clock every few minutes, his nerves building as 4:30 approached. He left the office at 4:15, walking the 2 blocks to the coffee shop Claire had mentioned, his heart pounding with each step. She was already there, sitting at a corner table by the window, looking nervous and determined in equal measure. When she saw him, her expression shifted into something softer, more vulnerable. Daniel sat down across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other, all the weeks of careful distance suddenly feeling absurd. "Hi," Claire said quietly. "Hi. I wasn't sure you'd come. I almost didn't, about 5 times on the walk over." Daniel's hands were shaking slightly, so he clasped them together on the table. "But I'm here." "Why?" It was the same question he'd been asking himself all day. Why risk this? Why step back into something that had already caused professional complications and family drama? Why choose vulnerability over the safety of isolation? "Because you were right," Daniel said finally. "I've been hiding. From life, from connection, from anything that might hurt. And I convinced myself that was noble, that I was protecting Emma, protecting myself. But really, I was just scared. Of what? Of losing someone again. Of letting you close and then having you leave like Sarah did. Of Emma getting attached to someone who might disappoint her. Daniel's voice dropped lower. Of wanting something so much that losing it would break me. Claire reached across the table, her hand covering his. I'm not Sarah. I'm not going to disappear. You can't promise that. No one can. You're right. I can't. Her fingers tightened around his. But I can promise I'll be honest with you about what I want, what scares me, where I'm struggling. I can promise that if I ever need to leave, it won't be without explanation or conversation. I can promise to show up consistently for as long as you'll let me. Daniel looked at their joined hands, feeling something in his chest crack open. I want to believe that. Then believe it, or at least give me the chance to prove it. Claire's voice was steady, certain. I know your life is complicated. I know Emma comes first. I know you can't do spontaneous plans or grand romantic gestures. And I don't want those things, Daniel. I want someone real, someone who shows up even when it's hard, someone who sees me as a person, not a project or a prize. I see you, Daniel said quietly. I've always seen you. I know. That's why I'm here. That's why I quit my job and told my mother I was done living the life she planned for me. Because you helped me see that I deserved to choose for myself. I didn't do that. You did. We did it together. By being honest with each other when everyone else was telling us what we should want. Claire leaned forward slightly. So I'm asking you directly, what do you want, Daniel Hayes? Not what's safe, not what makes sense logically. What do you actually want? Daniel took a breath, feeling 5 years of careful self-protection dissolve in the face of Claire's clear-eyed honesty. I want you, he said. I want to see where this goes. I want to stop being scared and start being brave enough to believe that good things can last. Claire's smile was like sunrise, warm and transformative. Then let's start there. No promises about forever, no pressure about what this has to be, just honesty and showing up and figuring it out together. Together, Daniel repeated, the word feeling like a revelation. He'd been alone for so long, carrying everything himself, convinced that was the only way to keep Emma safe. But maybe there was another way. Maybe letting someone in didn't mean risking everything. Maybe it meant building something strong enough to weather whatever came. They sat in that coffee shop for an hour, talking about Claire's plans to start a consulting business, about Daniel's carefully structured life and how it might expand to include someone else, about fears and hopes and the messy reality of building something real instead of perfect. When Daniel finally stood to leave, Claire walked him to the door. Thank you, she said, for being brave enough to show up. Thank you for not letting me hide. She kissed his cheek, brief and gentle. I'll see you soon? Yes. Soon. Daniel walked back to his car feeling lighter than he had in weeks, possibility settling into his chest where fear had been. It wasn't perfect. It was still complicated. But it was real and honest and worth fighting for. And that, he was learning, made all the difference. The weeks that followed their coffee shop conversation unfolded with a careful deliberateness that felt both terrifying and right. Daniel and Claire didn't rush into anything. No dramatic declarations, no sudden integration of their lives. Instead, they built something slowly, honestly, in the spaces between Daniel's responsibilities and Claire's new business venture. Their first real date happened 2 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon when Emma was at a classmate's birthday party. Claire met Daniel at a quiet restaurant near the waterfront, and they talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing, her consulting business that was slowly gaining clients, his infrastructure project at work, the small victories and frustrations of their separate lives beginning to intertwine. I told my mother I'm seeing someone, Claire said over dessert, her voice casual but her eyes watching Daniel's reaction carefully. How did that go? About as well as you'd expect. She asked if it was you. I told her it was none of her business. Claire's smile was wry. She's still not speaking to me, which honestly makes things easier. I'm sorry you're dealing with that because of me. Not because of you, because of my choices. Claire reached across the table, her hand finding his. I need you to stop taking responsibility for my decisions, Daniel. I chose to end my engagement. I chose to leave my job. I chose to tell my family I was done living for their approval. Those were my choices, and I don't regret any of them. Daniel turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. It's hard not to feel responsible when people are getting hurt. My mother isn't hurt. She's disappointed that I'm not following her script. That's different. Claire squeezed his hand gently. And eventually she'll either accept it or she won't. But either way, I'm done letting her expectations control my life. The strength in her voice, the certainty of her choices, made something in Daniel's chest settle. He'd spent so much time worrying about being the reason Claire's life had changed. But she was right. She'd made her own decisions, and treating her like a victim of his influence was just another way of not seeing her clearly. You're remarkable, he said quietly. I'm just finally being honest about what I want. Claire's expression softened. Speaking of which, when do I get to meet Emma? The question made Daniel's heart skip. He'd been avoiding this topic, not because he didn't want Claire in Emma's life, but because introducing his daughter to someone he was dating felt like crossing a threshold he couldn't uncross. That's a big step, he said carefully. I know, and I'm not pushing. But if this is going somewhere, and I hope it is, eventually I'd like to be part of your whole life, not just the parts that happen when Emma's somewhere else. She was right, of course. Daniel couldn't keep these parts of his life separate indefinitely. But the thought of Emma getting attached to Claire, of building that connection and then having it fall apart, sent ice through his veins. I need time, he said, to be sure this is real and lasting before I bring Emma into it. She's already lost one parent. I can't risk her losing someone else. I understand, and I'll wait as long as you need. Claire's voice dropped lower. But Daniel, at some point you have to trust that this is real, that I'm not going anywhere, that taking the risk is worth it. 3 months into their relationship, Claire's consulting business had grown enough that she was considering renting office space. Daniel helped her research locations, reviewing lease agreements and discussing logistics over dinners that had become their regular Wednesday evening routine. There's a space opening up in the building next to Meridian, Claire said one evening, pulling up photos on her phone. Good location, decent price, close to clients. Daniel looked at the listing and felt his stomach tighten. That's 2 blocks from my office. I know. Is that weird? I wasn't sure if you'd want me that close to your workplace. It's not weird. It's just, people will know. That we're together, I mean. Claire set down her phone, her expression serious. Does that bother you? I know we've been keeping this quiet, but at some point people are going to find out anyway. Daniel thought about the months of careful privacy, of keeping their relationship separate from his professional life. He told himself it was about protecting Claire from more drama with her mother, about maintaining appropriate boundaries. But the truth was, he'd been protecting himself, keeping this part of his life contained so it couldn't spill over and complicate everything else. It doesn't bother me, he said finally. I think I'm just used to keeping everything separate. Work is work, Emma is Emma, and you're this separate space that's just mine. But I don't want to be separate forever. I want to be part of your actual life, Daniel, all of it. Claire reached for his hand across the table. I know that's scary, but hiding isn't protecting anyone anymore. It's just keeping us both small. The words echoed what Robert had told him months ago, what Daniel had been slowly learning to accept. Hiding from life didn't keep him safe. It just kept him alone. Okay, he said. Rent the space. Be 2 blocks from my office. Let people figure it out. You're sure? I'm terrified. But yes, I'm sure. Claire's smile was worth the fear. Good, because I already put down a deposit. Daniel laughed despite himself. You're impossible. I'm decisive. There's a difference. The shift from private relationship to something more public happened gradually. People at Meridian started noticing Daniel leaving the building and meeting Claire for lunch. Colleagues who'd whispered about them months ago now saw them together and drew their own conclusions. Robert called Daniel into his office one afternoon with a knowing smile. So I hear Claire Morgan has office space in the Parker building now. She does. Her consulting business is doing well. And you two are... Robert left the question hanging. Together, yes. Daniel met his manager's eyes directly. Is that going to be a problem? Not for me. She doesn't work here anymore, so there's no policy violation. And honestly, after everything that happened with her mother, I'm glad you both found something good. Robert's expression turned more serious. But you should know Catherine Morgan is still making noise in certain circles. Nothing that affects you professionally, but the woman holds a grudge. Claire's handling it. I'm sure she is. Just wanted you to be aware. Robert stood, signaling the conversation was ending. For what it's worth, Daniel, you seem different lately. Lighter. Whatever you and Claire have figured out, it's good for you. The observation stayed with Daniel through the afternoon, settling into the recognition that he was different. The careful invisibility he'd maintained for years had dissolved, replaced by something more present, more engaged. He smiled more at work, joined occasional lunch groups, even attended a happy hour when the timing worked with Emma's schedule. The walls he'd built hadn't just protected him, they'd isolated him. And taking them down, brick by careful brick, had let light back into corners of his life he'd forgotten existed. 4 months into their relationship, Emma came home from school with an announcement. Madison's mom invited us to dinner on Saturday. Can we go? Daniel looked up from the report he'd been reading, surprised. Jennifer invited us to dinner? She said you and her could talk while Madison and I play. Please, Daddy. She has a new kitten. Daniel thought about the coffee date he'd had with Jennifer months ago, the friendly connection that had remained just that, friendly, uncomplicated, a reminder that not all relationships required romantic potential to be valuable. They'd done a few playdates since then, easy afternoons where the girls entertained themselves while the adults made comfortable small talk. Sure, we can go. That sounds nice. Can we bring someone? Emma asked, her voice carefully casual in a way that set off Daniel's parental radar. Like who? Like your friend Claire. You talk to her a lot on the phone. I want to meet her. Daniel's heart stopped. He and Claire had been so careful about keeping their relationship separate from Emma's life, never talking on the phone when she was around, never mentioning each other. But 6-year-olds were observant, and apparently Emma had noticed more than he'd realized. How do you know about Claire? I heard you talking to Aunt Sarah about her, and you smile different when you're texting her. Emma sat down beside him on the couch, her small face serious. Is she your girlfriend? The direct question deserved a direct answer. Daniel set aside his report and turned to face his daughter fully. Yes, she is. I've been dating her for a few months now. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to be sure it was serious before I introduced you. I didn't want you to meet someone who might not be around for very long. Emma processed this with the thoughtful consideration she applied to most things. But she's still around now, after months? She is. Then can I meet her, please? Daniel looked at his daughter, 6 years old, perceptive, brave in ways he was still learning to be, and realized she was ready for this, even if he wasn't. Let me talk to Claire first. But yes, I think it's time. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Daniel called Claire and told her about the conversation. She asked to meet me? Claire's voice held wonder and nervousness in equal measure. She did. Are you ready for that? I've been ready since our 3rd date. The question is whether you're ready. Daniel thought about all his fears. Emma getting attached and then getting hurt, introducing someone into their carefully balanced life and having it fall apart, risking his daughter's emotional stability for his own happiness. But he also thought about the past 4 months, about Claire's consistency and honesty, about the way she'd shown up for him even when it was hard. I'm ready, he said. Terrified, but ready. Then let's do it. Saturday dinner at Jennifer's? Actually, I was thinking something smaller first, just the 3 of us. Maybe that park Emma likes. Saturday afternoon? Low pressure, easy escape route if it goes badly. Claire laughed softly. You've really thought this through. I've thought about almost nothing else since Emma asked. Okay, park on Saturday. I'll be there. Saturday afternoon arrived with perfect autumn weather. Clear skies, cool breeze, the kind of day that felt designed for significant moments. Daniel and Emma arrived at the park first, and Daniel spotted Claire waiting near the playground, looking nervous in a way he'd rarely seen her. Is that her? Emma whispered, suddenly shy. That's her. Come on. They walked over together, and Claire crouched down to Emma's level immediately, her smile warm but not overwhelming. Hi, Emma. I'm Claire. Your dad has told me so much about you. He's told me about you too, Emma said, then with characteristic 6-year-old honesty added, but not until this week because he was keeping you secret. Claire's laugh was genuine. Well, I'm glad the secret's out. Want to show me this park your dad says you love? Emma grabbed Claire's hand without hesitation, already pulling her toward the swings. Daniel followed, his heart in his throat, watching as his daughter and the woman he was falling in love with began building their own connection. The afternoon unfolded with surprising ease. Claire pushed Emma on the swings, admired her climbing skills on the jungle gym, and listened with genuine interest to Emma's detailed explanation of playground politics and who was friends with whom. By the time they settled on a bench to share the snacks Daniel had packed, Emma was chattering away like they'd known each other for months. "Do you like my daddy?" Emma asked suddenly, with the bluntness only children could manage. Claire glanced at Daniel, then back at Emma. "I do, very much. He's kind and smart, and he makes me laugh." "He makes me laugh too, sometimes." Emma swung her legs, thoughtful. "Are you going to marry him?" "Emma," Daniel warned, mortified. But Claire just smiled. "I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I hope I get to keep being friends with both of you for a long time." "Friends is good," Emma decided. "Madison's mom says her dad has a friend now too. She says it's nice that grown-ups can have friends who aren't just for work." The simple wisdom of that statement made both adults smile. For the next hour, they stayed at the park, the three of them finding an easy rhythm that felt less like an audition and more like something that could become real. When they finally said goodbye, Emma hugged Claire without prompting, and Daniel felt something in his chest crack open completely. "That went well," Claire said quietly while Emma ran ahead to the car. "Better than I'd hoped. Thank you for being so good with her." "She's amazing, Daniel. You've done an incredible job with her." "We've done an incredible job," Daniel corrected. "Emma and me together." "Well, you're both pretty remarkable." Claire kissed his cheek. "Same time next week?" "Definitely." Over the following months, Claire became a regular presence in their lives. Not every day, not overwhelming Emma's routine, but steady and consistent. Saturday park visits became tradition. Claire attended one of Emma's school concerts, sitting beside Daniel and cheering as enthusiastically as any parent. When Emma's class did a career day, Claire came to talk about starting a business, and Emma told everyone proudly that Claire was her dad's girlfriend. Daniel's life expanded in ways he'd forgotten were possible. He still left work at 4 to pick up Emma, still prioritized his daughter above everything else. But now there was space for Claire too. Dinners together, weekend activities, quiet evenings after Emma was asleep where they could just be together without the weight of everything that had brought them here. 6 months after Emma's first meeting with Claire, Daniel's sister Sarah called with unexpected news. "I heard from Sarah's mother, your Sarah, I mean." Daniel's heart stopped. "What?" "She reached out through a mutual friend. Says she's been in therapy, getting help, wants to know if she could maybe write Emma a letter." Daniel sat down hard, the room spinning slightly. Sarah, his ex, Emma's mother, the woman who'd disappeared 5 years ago, leaving nothing but a note and an empty bank account. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing yet. I wanted to talk to you first, but Daniel, she sounded different, stable, like maybe she's actually gotten help. It's been 5 years, Sarah. Emma barely remembers her. I don't even know if—" Daniel stopped, overwhelmed by the sudden resurgence of something he'd thought was settled. "I know, but she's still Emma's mother, and if she's genuinely doing better, maybe Emma deserves the chance to have some kind of relationship with her. Maybe. I need to think about this." That evening, Daniel told Claire about the call. They were sitting on his couch, Emma asleep down the hall, and Claire listened without interrupting while Daniel worked through his complicated feelings. "I don't know if I can trust her," he said finally. "She left without explanation, without checking on Emma for 5 years. What if she comes back into our lives and then leaves again? Emma would be devastated." "Those are all valid concerns," Claire said carefully. "But this isn't really about Sarah, is it? It's about Emma's right to know her mother if her mother is genuinely ready to be present. Emma's fine without her. We're fine." "You are. But that doesn't mean Emma wouldn't benefit from having both parents in her life, if that's possible." Claire took his hand. "I know this is scary, but maybe you could start small. Let Sarah send a letter, see what she says, and then decide from there. What if Emma gets her hopes up? Then you'll be there to help her process whatever happens, the same way you've been there for her through everything else." Claire's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't protect Emma from all disappointment, Daniel. You can only love her through it. The words settled into Daniel's chest, uncomfortable but true. He'd spent 5 years trying to shield Emma from the pain of her mother's absence, but maybe protecting her meant allowing her the chance to build whatever relationship was possible, even if it was complicated and imperfect. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll tell Sarah's mother she can send a letter. We'll see what happens from there." The letter arrived 2 weeks later, addressed to Emma in handwriting Daniel still recognized. He read it first, standing in his kitchen with hands that shook slightly, making sure the contents were appropriate before deciding whether to share it with his daughter. Sarah's words were careful, honest, apologetic. She explained her postpartum depression in age-appropriate terms, acknowledged that leaving had been wrong, described the therapy and treatment she'd received. She asked about Emma's life now, said she understood if Emma didn't want contact, and promised that whatever Emma decided, she would respect it. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase 5 years of absence. But it was real and human and honest in a way that made Daniel think maybe Sarah had genuinely changed. He showed the letter to Claire that evening and then to his sister, both of them agreeing that Emma should be allowed to decide for herself what kind of response she wanted. That night, Daniel sat on Emma's bed and told her about the letter. "Your mom wrote to you. She's been getting help for the sickness that made her leave, and she wanted you to know about it." Emma's eyes went wide. "My mom? The one who left when I was a baby?" "That's right. What does she want?" "She wants you to know that leaving wasn't your fault, that she was sick and needed help, and that she's sorry she's been gone so long." Daniel held up the letter. "She wrote you a letter explaining everything. You can read it if you want, or I can read it to you, or we cannot read it at all. Whatever you want." Emma stared at the envelope for a long moment. "Will she leave again if I write back?" "I don't know, sweetheart. She might. People are complicated and sometimes they make mistakes. Like how you were scared to let Claire meet me because you thought she might leave?" The comparison was so accurate it made Daniel's throat tight. "Yeah, kind of like that." "But Claire didn't leave. She stayed." Emma reached for the letter. "Maybe my mom will stay too. Maybe she's done being scared." Daniel helped Emma read the letter, explaining the parts that were confusing, holding her when she cried at the acknowledgement that her mother's leaving hadn't been about her. They talked for an hour about feelings and fears and what it might mean to have both parents in her life. "I think I want to write her back," Emma said finally. "Is that okay?" "Of course it's okay. What do you want to say?" "That I'm glad she's feeling better, and that I have a really good life with you and Claire and Aunt Sarah, and that maybe she could visit sometime if she wants to meet me." Daniel's heart swelled with pride at his daughter's capacity for forgiveness, for hope, for believing that people could change and relationships could heal. They wrote the letter together that night, Emma dictating while Daniel wrote in his careful handwriting. Simple words about school and friends and the life she'd built. An invitation to be part of it if Sarah was ready. 3 months later, Sarah visited on a Saturday afternoon, carefully supervised and bounded by time limits Daniel had insisted on. It was awkward, emotional, complicated in all the ways Daniel had expected. But it was also the beginning of something, not a magical reconciliation, but a careful rebuilding of connection that acknowledged the past while making space for a different future. Emma handled it with remarkable grace, accepting Sarah's presence without erasing the life she'd built with Daniel and Claire. She called Sarah by her first name rather than Mom, a distinction that felt important and right. The visits remained occasional, carefully structured, always with Daniel present. But it meant Emma had both parents in her life, imperfect and complicated as that was. A year after their first meeting at the park, Claire's consulting business had grown successful enough that she needed to hire staff. She'd rented larger office space, built a client list that impressed even her skeptical mother, and created the independent life she'd always wanted. Daniel had been promoted to senior network architect, a position that came with more responsibility but also more flexibility. He still left at 4 most days, but the promotion meant he had leverage to set boundaries that protected his time with Emma. They'd built something together, not perfect, not without complications, but real and honest and strong enough to weather the challenges that came. One Saturday evening, after Emma was asleep and they were sitting on Daniel's couch in the comfortable silence that came from knowing someone deeply, Claire shifted to face him. "Do you remember what I said in the parking garage that night when my car broke down?" Daniel's heart rate picked up. "You said a lot of things." I said I wished you were mine. Claire's voice was soft, certain. I still think about that moment sometimes. How terrified I was to say it out loud. How sure I was that it was impossible. It felt impossible. But it wasn't. It was just scary. Claire took his hand. We built this, Daniel. Through all the complications and drama and fear, we built something real. We did. So I'm going to say it again, not as a wish this time, but as a truth. Claire's eyes met his, clear and unwavering. You're mine, and I'm yours, if you want that. Daniel thought about the past year, about Emma laughing while Claire pushed her on swings, about building a life that had room for both professional success and personal happiness, about learning that being seen didn't mean being vulnerable to loss. It meant being brave enough to build something worth protecting. I want that, he said quietly. I've wanted it since you brought me coffee and refused to let me be invisible. Good. Claire kissed him, gentle and certain. Because I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever. You're stuck with me, Daniel Hayes. I can live with that. Can you? Even though I'm stubborn and dramatic and occasionally make decisions without consulting you first? Even though? Maybe even because of? Daniel pulled her closer. You made me brave, Claire. You made me believe that wanting more than survival was possible. You were always brave. You just needed someone to remind you. They sat together in the quiet apartment, Emma sleeping peacefully down the hall, their separate lives woven together into something neither could have built alone. It wasn't the perfect life either of them had imagined. It was better because it was real and honest and chosen deliberately despite all the reasons it might not work. Daniel had learned that being invisible didn't protect anyone, that letting someone in meant risking loss but also gaining everything that made life worth living, that his daughter needed to see him happy, not just functional. And Claire had learned that choosing herself over everyone's expectations was the bravest thing she could do. That real love didn't require perfection, just honesty and the willingness to show up even when it was hard. Together, they'd built something strong enough to last. Something that started with a broken coffee machine and a parking garage confession and became a life neither of them had known they were searching for. It wasn't the end of challenges or complications. Sarah's presence in Emma's life would remain complex. Claire's mother would eventually come around, or she wouldn't. Work would bring new pressures. Emma would grow and need different things. Life would continue to unfold with all its messy unpredictability. But they would face it together, with honesty and courage, and the kind of love that was built slowly, carefully, strong enough to weather whatever came next. And that was more than enough. It was everything.